The little fair-haired girl who was in tattered clothes was called Fiona Green. Despite the fact that she had a difficult childhood, since she was the illegitimate daughter of a count, she was able to master magic, and this ultimately allowed her to become a highly respected sorceress of the entire empire. This was a typical cliché for the main character of any story. However, Fiona was never able to get enough of the main character. She was a completely different girl. She had a rather strict biological father. His name was Graftrin, and he was always unhappy with his daughter. When Fiona thought a little and did not hear what her father asked her about, he immediately shouted at her, asking how she dared not listen to him. The girl was very ashamed because of this, because she understood what consequences this would ultimately have for her. However, she could not do anything about herself. Next to Fiona sat the eldest son of the Count. His name was Cain, and he turned to his father with a joyful smile and said that he should not have worried about such a trifle as her. In fact, at that moment, Fiona wanted to hit her brother incredibly badly because he had too cheeky a smile. But such a lowly being as she had to stay in place so that she would not be annoyed because, even though Fiona turned 10, she was just a weak, illegitimate child and a burden to her family. And the girl who once lived her usual life, now she became just that child. She turned into Fiona Green. Despite the fact that she was such a child who was in a difficult situation, in the future she was supposed to become a brilliant sorceress, Fiona. This fact really comforted the girl's soul. However, even despite this, she could not say that Fiona's transformation was a very good event for her. And all because, even considering Fiona's bright future, she was not the main heroine of this story. She was the main villain who only interfered with everything. And the worst thing for her was that she was also the final boss who had to die from the power of the main character's love. Of course, Fiona would very much like to give up all of this. However, what was written with a pen could not be cut down with an axe. Therefore, she had no chance. This story told about the Emperor, who was the main hero, and the Saint, who was the main heroine, and how they fell in love and saved the world. And in this world, there was no mercy for such a villain as Fiona. In the end, she had to transform into something that she remembered as a phoenix and threaten the main characters. The Emperor, of course, uses his sword to cut off the Fiona's head and thus pierces the curly heart that was torn from its owner. After that, Fiona's head was hung on the gate of the castle. Her body was burned to ashes, and Fiona's soul sank into darkness in order to experience eternal suffering for her crime. This is exactly what the future poor girl who reincarnated into Fiona's body looked like, and she was perfectly aware of it. At some point, she even began to think that it would have been much better if she had died earlier and not known all these severe torments. And while Fiona was thinking about all this, she realized that she needed to focus on the dinner she was at, because they could hit her with a cane again if she didn't listen. After a long silence, the father turned to his family and said that she was absolutely sure that everyone present knew that the war was not going very well. He also said that the imperial family ordered Magus to be sent to the northern front line, so someone from our family had to be there. As soon as the children heard this, they were also genuinely surprised. And Fiona knew that she still had to wait 6 years for her star hour. They were still at a point where the Empire was at a disadvantage due to losses in the fight against monsters. And I don't even look at the fact that this was a story in which the male and female main character had to save the world from the evil of dragons and monsters right at that moment when reality hit Fiona. But their father said that one of them should go to the northern front line in order to help them there. The youngest son of the Duke heard about this and was very surprised. He immediately asked what his father meant by participating in the war. After all, they thought that it would bypass them. In fact, the Grin family was one of the Empire's magician families, and therefore the palace asked for their support. But the problem was which of the 4 children had to go to war. As soon as the father heard these discontented voices, he immediately said that he was interested in whether any of his children wanted to take part in such a great feat. At that moment, Cain kicked Fiona off very hard on the road. The girl couldn't help herself. She screamed loudly and asked why he did it. But the guy ignored her questions. He just smiled happily and said that he thought that she should have gone there because she was already trash. In fact, in this estate, everyone except Fiona were children of the Countess, and therefore they want her worthless bastard to go to war. And they were not at all concerned by the fact that she was just a child who had barely turned 13, and she was still very poor at using magic. Cain demonstratively raised her hand up and said that their youngest asked to go there herself, so the father would no longer have to solve this problem. Fiona was very surprised when she heard it. However, the man continued and said that she couldn't say it out loud because the girl was so shy. Then she wanted to say something, but quickly fell silent. She saw her brother's evil look and thought that all her troubles were mainly because of him. so she wanted to take revenge on him one day. But their father was completely oblivious to the fact that all this was arranged. And when he saw that Fiona volunteered herself, he smiled happily and said that he was very glad that she wanted to go there herself. Fiona heard the lies in his voice and immediately assumed that this was all pre-planned, because their words matched each other incredibly well. But Cain at the same time replied that this was a very good proposal that would put the family in a good light. He also told his younger sister that she should be grateful that she, being a low-class person, had received such an amazing opportunity. Then her older sister turned to her and agreed with Cain. She said that he was supposed to be the successor and that she would be getting married very soon. Jane's third brother will also be engaged very soon, so everyone thought that it would be best for Fiona to go there. As soon as the girl heard this, she couldn't believe that they really meant it, because no one even taught her magic since they said that the bastard had no rights. They always took her to the attic and tortured her every day. But despite all this, Fiona certainly knew the basics of magic. However, she did not think that she would be able to cope with this minimal knowledge for the war. But as soon as she turned her head to the side, she saw that all her brothers were asking her with anticipation. Of course, she didn't really have it from the very beginning, and there was no one who would stand by Fiona's side in the estate elections. Only one line was devoted to revealing the past of this character, who was not even the main character. And this line said that being an illegitimate child, she grew up and received only teasing from her own family. Therefore, of course, the girl took a deep breath and told her family that she understood everything and that Soglazna would go there. She thought that even if she destroys her family, she will still end up in prison, and it would be better for her to go out on her own if she really had to do that. The father smiled joyfully and said that she is well done and that she made the right choice. The brothers and sisters also began to talk about the fact that she would be useful somewhere and that they were proud of her. Fiona thought it was suspicious of them to invite her to a family gathering when they didn't consider her a human being and kept her locked up in the attic all the time. She didn't feel like that even when she first learned an hour ago about what got into this body. Now she was completely broken because she understood what was waiting for her next. The girl could not believe that Fiona was the main villain who was in the same position as she was feeling the same feelings. In fact, this girl was offended by the whole world because she never received love from her family or from those around her. And in the end, she ended up in the swamp due to an irreversible choice. But unlike Fiona, the girl who moved into her body was not going to take offense at anyone because it was the same world that she wrote herself. Soon they were transferred to the northern front line, namely to Hyloy. As soon as Fiona arrived at the castle, she was very surprised by its scale, and she imagined the castle of the Duke of Halon in a completely different way. In the end, her family forced the girl to come to the northern front line, which was ruled by a ruthless duke. Even just looking at this man, it became clear that he was the one who was able to live in the castle of the Demon King. So Fiona assumed that she had dug her own grave with her own hands when she agreed to it. One of the knights who accompanied the girl led her to the huge scary doors and said that she needed to go there. She could open the door herself and enter inside. When Fiona saw this incredible huge door, she was amazed. But soon she still opened it and looked inside. In the first case, at the end of the hall, she saw a fair-haired, tall, blue-haired man who was directly the Duke of the North, whose name was Abel Haloy. As soon as the man saw the little girl, Tom immediately said that he had heard that a genius magician would come to support them. From his voice, Fiona understood that he was very unhappy because he shouted and asked why they had sent this skinny child to him. He doubted at all that she was capable of anything. In fact, Abel Halon was supposed to become the protagonist's mentor in the future. As the one who supported the hero, he was quite a popular character among the readers. And if there was any victory, Abel would definitely come to the aid of the main character. Despite the fact that now he is much younger than when he appeared in the original story, Fiona would dare to say that he is still a rather wild character, so she decided that she had to act. Bowing cautiously, she called her name, but she didn't even look at him. Abel heard how she introduced herself and immediately turned to Jerome, who was his assistant, and asked what was going on there and why he was framed like that. His assistant said that Count Grin spoke about sending the great magician of his blood, but he did not mention who exactly it would be. At that moment, Abel was incredibly angry. He shouted loudly, asking if the guy really wanted to say that Grin had sent him this little, incapable girl instead of himself. Then he sighed heavily. He said that now it is clear to him that this stupid idiot is thinking about them. He even promised himself that when this terribly important war ends, he will first of all make the Green family pay for it. At the same time, Fiona was perfectly aware that it would be the end of them now. And it's all thanks to her father, because the merciless Count of the North is very angry with the choice her father made. Well, she thought that she shouldn't have been so sad now. She had more serious problems than the Green family, and she needed to deal with them somehow first of all. As soon as she raised her eyes for a minute to check the situation around her, she saw that Abel did not stop looking at her. Because of this, she was very uncomfortable, but at that moment she suddenly heard him get up from his seat and come closer to her. Fiona immediately looked up and looked him straight in the eyes. The man calmed down a little. He said that she would explain to him why Count Green sent a child like her for such an important operation. He was so interested in whether the Green family didn't have any other talents besides her. Then Fiona explained that the first brother was the head of the family, her sister was going to get married very soon, and her second brother would also be engaged. And that is why she, being the youngest child, was sent to this place instead of all of them. Hearing this, Abel sighed heavily and said that apparently these idiots were really frivolous about the war that was going on around them. But even in spite of this, he still could understand them. Then he bent down to her in order to be on the same level with her and assumed that she was already prepared to fight. However, they definitely did not need children in this place. Therefore, turning around, he returned to his chair and told her to just go home, because here she definitely won't be able to help them. Fiona looked at him in surprise for some time. She could not believe that they had done this to her. The girl could not believe that he had just told her to her face that he had no time for useless people. She didn't know how it was with Abel. However, Fiona definitely didn't have a place where she could return if she left this estate. In the original story, she knew about her magical abilities and was banished from the Green and Halen estates. And the wounds from the fact that the world simply threw her into the garbage from time to time became the reason for the girl's development as a thief. However, since Telephone was now a completely different person, she knows that this body has extraordinary abilities. Therefore, the girl was not going to give up so easily. She turned to the Duke and asked him to wait another minute, because she had something to tell him. The man then looked at her in surprise. He thought that she would not say anything more, but it turned out not to be the case. When Fiona saw that he was listening to her, she immediately said that she would not be able to fulfill his orders. In fact, in that world, magicians were treated well everywhere, and instead of being out on the street, it was best for her to prove her abilities and lay the foundation for a relationship with him. In any case, the situation would definitely begin to change after the main character appeared in the war. And Fiona believed that if she lasted until this time, she would collect enough money and be able to avoid the death penalty and also settle in the countryside and live peacefully. Therefore, she approached Abel and said that she did not want to return anywhere, but she was not going to stubbornly ask him to leave her. She simply asked him to give her just one chance to prove his worth, and then he would convince himself that she was not worthless. Abel became interested. When he heard this, he became interested. Does a child like her really think that he will be able to give her this chance? He also asked if you are going to take over the cleaning. But Fiona, with full confidence in the voice, said that it was not like that. She just wanted him to allow her to go out on the battlefield as a mage just once, and then she would show that she could be useful in this war. Hearing this, he was very surprised, as was his assistant. They did not expect that such a small and insecure girl could have hidden such strength and courage. For some time, he just stood and looked at her. Abel was well aware of all the risks he would take if he agreed to this deal. Therefore, he had to think everything through very carefully. Fiona herself began to worry a little. She did not understand what happened to their atmosphere, and she very much hoped that he would not insult her for the fact that she had said all this at all and would not kick her out because of it. Then suddenly, she saw a small smile on Abel's face. After that, he stretched his hand forward and said that this was the funniest thing he had heard recently. He took her by the hand and said that this child has very good jokes, so he was ready to give her at least one chance to prove herself. Abel explained that she had to go forward and prove her worth. If she could not do this, the doors of the estate would be opened so that she could leave. After that, he asked his assistant to take Fiona to her room so that she could rest a little after the long journey. If the assistant returned to the Duke, the man immediately asked where he was with the child, and the guy explained that he had left her in the room. Then, heaving a heavy sigh, Abel said, "I'm arrogant. Self-confidence is simply indescribable, but that's exactly what attracted him to her. She says that she will be useful." Therefore, turning to Jerome, he asked what the man thought about this. His assistant replied that compared to her peers, she was quite straightforward and very smart for her age. After all, she was still a child, so he doubted whether it was really worth going to the battlefield and fighting. Abel agreed with him, and after that he asked if the father had really sent her to the war. The guy answered that it was so in the letter. That's exactly what he wrote. Then the man replied that he had no choice. In 2 days, he was going to send her to the second wall so that she could finally show what she was capable of. Hearing this, he was genuinely amazed. He knew that the second wall was full of demons and that this was an incredibly dangerous place even for an adult, not to mention a little girl. But Abel, seeing the fear on his face, calmed him down and said that of course he would go together with her. The assistant was even more surprised when he heard that. After all, the Duke usually didn't go there. Well, the man went to the window and said that this time he will go there, and if she turns out to be useless, he will personally feed this girl with a demon, so that she will no longer interfere under their feet. At the same time, Fiona was taken to her room, changed into another dress, and finally lay down on the bed. She was very tired. In fact, the pressure at this meeting was incredibly heavy. But she was proud of herself because she was still able to overcome this fear and show that she also had character. But it was very difficult for her to believe in the fact that she was really afraid of that guy whom she created herself. It was really a pity. But in spite of all this, Fiona wasn't quite sure that it was too much for her to think about it. So she decided to think about it later. The girl began to fall asleep and realized that this day was too educational for her, and she had no more strength. So she fell into a peaceful sleep. When the next day came, together with Abel early in the morning, they went to the battlefield. Fiona was riding in a carriage, and a man next to her was riding his horse. He turned to the girl and told her to listen carefully because the time had come to confirm her words, which she so boldly scattered last evening. Fiona thought that he was speaking too confidently. Despite the fact that he was a character created by her, his appearance was the only thing that was special about him. Otherwise, he did not differ from anyone else. But she didn't argue with him. That's why she said that she understood everything then. Abel, smiling slyly, asked if they weren't afraid of her at all. The girl looked down and answered that she had no reason to be afraid and that it was actually true. In fact, Fiona could not be calm. She once lived in the 21st century, and now she will fight with imaginary demons. But she had no choice, because she knew the future of her character and did not want the same for herself. Abel then continued to tell her about how their battle would unfold. He explained that he would not protect her, and this means that it is quite possible that she might die. But Fiona replied that this was not a problem for her at all because she was not afraid of death. In fact, the most terrible thing for her was the future. Without hopes and a sword, it does not matter how she will die later. She thought that it would be even better than the suffering that awaited her. Fiona still didn't understand why she had to get into the body of this character. She thought that perhaps the role of a secondary character would be more suitable for her, and she would feel much calmer there. Soon, they finally approached the second wall. There the girl immediately heard the voices of the knights who were shouting to each other that the demons were already approaching, and this meant that the battle was in full swing. The girl could not believe that Abel had really brought her to this place. Following him, she wondered if it was true that all this was just a joke, and they will now leave for another position. Well, the man replied that by chance they arrived just at the right time. Therefore, he told Fiona to go and prove her worth. The girl was genuinely frightened. She could not believe that in such a situation she had to make an impression and put herself out there. There was a lot of bustle and danger around her. She did not know how she could do it. Then, looking around, she suddenly saw that there was a ladder that led to the very top of the fortress. Fiona assumed that this could even help her, so turning to Abel, she answered that it will rise on the fortress wall. Abel did not give birth to you. He only slowly began to rise after her in order to check what she could do. The girl at the same time was running very fast. Since she was in this place for the first time, she needed to understand how the battlefield looked in general in order to develop a strategy for herself. Despite the fact that she had read about all this in her own novel, seeing the massacre with her own eyes was completely different and more effective. Therefore, soon after climbing to the very top and seeing what was happening below, she was genuinely amazed. Fiona even stood silently for a while and looked at all this with a horrifying look. Abel, who got up after her with a happy smile and asked what her first impression was of the battlefield that was right below her. In fact, it was all just a terrible sight. Many corpses were lying around. Monsters continued to kill people. The entire field was stained with human blood. Fiona could not tear herself away from this look. She could not believe that all this was really happening in reality, and she still had to participate in it in some way. Then she heard the screamers who said that it was necessary to burn the monsters, because in this way, they would not be able to regenerate and attack them again. Others shouted for help. However, it was impossible to do it. After all, the knights were busy so that the monsters did not kill them themselves. For some time, she just looked at all this. At that moment, her hands suddenly began to tremble, and Fiona said that it was all just terrible. And it wasn't about the battlefield at all. She was talking about how terrible it was she herself, because it was she who created this scene of Fiona, and really didn't want it to be like that. However, she didn't even think about how cruel it all was. At the same time, Abel asked if she was so scared that she couldn't even move. He said that if she realized that the arrival was a mistake, then of course she could turn around and leave at any moment. However, Fiona said that she did not agree with this, and at that moment she began to use her weak, not fully developed magic. The girl knew that it was she who created this chaos in her past life, and she had to be responsible for it. So she directed her magic at the monsters below. She said that she was ready to start fighting. The criteria by which the level of the mage was determined were very special. The first criterion was the amount of mana possessed by him, as well as how large-scale a natural phenomenon can create this person and, ultimately, his effectiveness. Fiona felt that a rather weak flow of mana was coming from her. She used such strong magic for the first time in her new body, so she needed some time to get used to it. The only thing she could believe in at that moment was the insane talent and potential of her character. After all, she was the one who made her so strong. At that moment, Abel suddenly raised his head and saw that huge black clouds were approaching the battlefield. He was very surprised that the thunderstorm was about to start. Fiona thought that apparently what she thought about was a little different from what she wanted, but the girl continued to try to do what she needed. At that moment, the battlefield seemed to freeze because the knights and other monsters saw how a huge lightning flashed through the sky straight to the ground. But in fact, Fiona directed this lightning straight at a huge troll who was supposed to attack one of the knights. This phenomenon struck the monster and all his assistants who were around. After some time, this monster simply fell to the ground completely motionless. The knights were struck by this phenomenon. They could not believe that it existed. It was really dead. And Fiona at the same time was really quite herself. She was finally able to show more potential of her magic and showed what she was capable of. Abel saw all this and suddenly smiled joyfully and said that it was amazing. At that moment, he came closer to her and took the girl in his arms. He said that it was like a divine punishment. The man was really amazed. He replied that it was the first time he had seen a magician with 2 skills and wondered if she was really just a child. Fiona was even a little worried. However, she said that, of course she is a child. Abel then began to move away from the edge of the roof on which they were standing, and said that he was sure that everything was exactly like that. When the girl looked around, she noticed that everything was very shaky around her, and at some point it even seemed that everything would collapse if he took even one more step. She couldn't believe that Abel was just about to leave her because the abilities she showed weren't enough. After all, they stood on the very edge of the top of this building. But the Duke continued to hold her quite firmly. He told her to look away because the demons began to retreat after her ominous blow. She looked down and was amazed because it was really so many demonic dogs started to run back into the forest. They didn't want to fight anymore because they were afraid that the same thing might happen to them. Fiona was very pleased. She felt as if she had achieved something for the first time since entering this world. And it was very pleasant for her to realize that she was at least a little useful. However, when she looked down, she saw that all the townspeople were looking at her for some reason and couldn't even take their eyes away. Because of this, she was worried. Smiling nervously, she waved at them and thought to herself that it was very awkward for her to do anything when someone held her in her arms. But after a short silence, the girl suddenly heard how everyone around them began to shout loudly with joy. They applauded and welcomed their new magician. They began to thank her for the fact that she saved them and continued to rejoice that now they had a magician. Fiona looked at Abel with a joyful smile and wondered if she was able to cope with what she had promised. The man was silent for some time. After that, he only smiled slightly and finally put her on her feet. Then he patted her on the head and said that he was very glad to welcome her to Helen. Then Fiona realized that Abel recognized her in this way, and this meant that now she had a completely different life. Smiling joyfully, the girl said that it was a great honor for her, and she thought that he had just called her by her name, and it really meant a lot. In fact, he knew her name very well all the time. However, for some reason, he called her a child or even a baby. This put her in a very uncomfortable position, but she thought that she would be able to prove to him more than once that she is not just a little child who needs to be taken care of. And since that moment, a whole month has passed. Fiona has already settled in the Duke's palace. She even had her own servants who were incredibly kind to her. She became known to the servants as the brilliant young lady Poppy, and realized that the episode when she released the lightning in the castle made a deep impression on everyone around. Fiona assumed that maybe it was because there were no more children in this place, but Everyone around took such care of her and worried that she was very pleased because she had never experienced anything like this before. Even Abel was completely second. He himself ordered the servants to feed and fatten the girl because she was too young for her age, and this was wrong. This was the main order that he gave, and thanks to this, her pockets were filled with various goodies. So during this month, she grew up quite quickly and now looked like a girl of her age. When Fiona was walking around the yard one fine day, she saw that Jerome came out of the office. He was holding a stack of various papers in his hands. Taking a closer look at him, she noticed that since he looked like a zombie, Abel only beat him quite badly. Therefore, she felt very sorry for this unfortunate helper. Then Fiona came closer to him and gave him a candy and said that she was for him. The man immediately smiled happily and thanked her. Fiona always cheered him up. Then the girl asked where he was going with all these papers. Jerome answered that he was going to the 4th fortress wall. He heard that they were suddenly attacked this morning, so Abel sent him there to investigate the situation. In fact, the demons persistently attacked throughout the day and even at night. It was possible to say that the situation on the 2nd wall, for which he was responsible, had slightly improved. However, other places were quite weak, so we should not forget about them as well. When Fiona heard it, she was very surprised. It was hard to imagine that something like this was repeated for 6 long years, until the main plot began and all the main characters appeared. Therefore, smiling, the girl turned to him and said that, since the situation is still uncertain, she would like to go with him. Hearing this, the man was immediately very surprised. He wondered if she really thought she could handle it, but the girl replied that she could definitely handle it, and there were no problems with it. In fact, Jerome was so worried because he still remembered that ridiculous incident when she was very scared when he saw this topic. However, the difference between the view from the fortress wall and the view up close was already too strong, and that is why it was difficult for her to realize this fact. So, after that incident, she always went with Abel. Jerome did not refuse her, and she wondered if he could, in that case, keep this trip of theirs a secret from the Duke. The girl who wanted this hotel herself said that of course it would not be a problem. She also thought that it would be very beneficial for a man not to believe that for some reason he hated when someone in general messed with her in a similar way. And soon after that they got together and still went to the 4th fortress wall. There was the most real massacre. In fact, many knights were already dead. And in order for them not to interfere with fighting off the demons, they were simply led into one big pile and left there next to the corpses of those very enemies. They still could not understand when the reinforcements would finally arrive. After all, they desperately needed it. They told the commander that they did not have enough people, but no one could do anything about it. However, some of the knights began to talk among themselves and spread the rumor that Fiona from the Green family was already on the way. So they had to get help very soon. Indeed, it was like that even before the sun had set. Over the horizon, the girl and Jerome finally arrived at that place. There they were immediately met by the main knight. He began to report to Jerome about the situation around him. After bowing, the man said that they were currently counting the victims of today's attack. Jerome remained standing next to him and immediately asked what the extent of the damage was after these battles. Fiona did not listen to all this. She only approached the edge of the fortress and looked down. The girl knew that sparks were flying in all directions at that time, and she also felt the sharp smell of hot flesh. In fact, it was not the first time she saw something like this. So she gradually began to get used to this terrible picture that appeared in front of her day after day. Jerome then asked if they had any tools that they lacked. The man immediately said that they needed a lot of wagons, firewood, and a few more weapons because otherwise they would not be able to stand for more than an hour. In fact, because of this whole situation, the girl could not simply remain calmly next to Jerome. She believed that she had to help those men who continued to guard the border. When the guys saw that Fiona had come down to them, they immediately rejoiced. They knew her by face and happily smiled and thought that she would help them. Well, the girl smiled and answered that she really came down to help them. Originally, she was going to burn all the unnecessary corpses. First, Fiona had to concentrate and feel the flow of mana. Then, after the corpses, she redirected all this energy directly to one of the monsters that was going to attack them, and he immediately caught fire, and soon fell to the ground, immobilized. Smiling, she said that she could easily take care of this area, so it was better for us to move to the other side and help all the other knights there. In the end, they burned demons and corpses for a large amount of time. Fiona was even a little tired of these creatures. Then she turned back and saw another large mountain with various corpses of both people and demons. She was about to start burning it, but suddenly she saw something unusual. A dark-haired guy was lying among all these beings. She looked more closely and noticed that it was some kind of child. His shirt was covered in blood. Even his legs were not visible because he was under rubble. Approaching him in order to take a closer look, the girl assumed that he was most likely about her age. Fiona also paid attention to his clothes and realized that he was not a soldier. She assumed that he could be a mercenary. The girl decided that he was dead, so she decided to pray for him. She sat on her knees and folded her hands together and began to read a prayer. She had the mind of an adult in the body of a child, so it didn't matter much if she died, but for this guy, everything would be different. And it was for this reason that she decided that she should accompany him properly. Then Fiona suddenly took a closer look while reading the prayer and saw that his eyes began to move, and he began to make some sounds. She was terribly frightened by this. The girl even jumped back a little. She assumed that maybe this guy could somehow become a zombie. She thought that in this world everything is possible because it was written in the fantasy genre, so even the troops could talk here. But when he started making some sounds again, she realized that most likely he was not a zombie. This child was still alive. Fiona took a stick in her hands and began to remove the corpse of the monster from his body. She immediately shouted to the others and said that she had found one survivor. In a short time, Aya still managed to remove the monster's body from him, and his legs were finally free. The girl then came closer and saw very strong bleeding at the bottom of his stomach. She immediately understood that there was a rather serious wound. She suggested that it would be best to turn him over in order to carefully look at other parts of the body, because the other injuries could be even more serious, and it would be necessary to act faster. When Fiona did this, she immediately began to examine his body, but suddenly noticed that this guy had opened his eyes. She realized that this meant that he was conscious. She immediately began to hit him on the cheeks so that he would not lose him again. The girl looked intently into his blue eyes and tried to talk to him. Fiona asked if he could hear her. She also tried to tell him that they were safe, because he didn't quite know where he was. She also asked him not to lose consciousness again. Then the girl suddenly heard that he was trying to talk to her. She could even understand some of the words he was saying. Fiona was very happy that he woke up and was conscious, and this meant that he had a chance to survive. If she immediately takes him to the doctor, then maybe everything will not be as bad as she thought. However, when she looked at him more closely, she noticed that he even had a very attractive face. He would have been incredibly handsome. If he had been healthy, he would have bled. However, Fiona still could not understand why such a guy was in this place. Besides, despite the fact that she had never seen her before, he seemed incredibly familiar to her. She couldn't understand why she had such a feeling, but suddenly Fiona, continuing to look at him, didn't even notice that another monster was approaching them. But this unfamiliar guy could see it. He immediately looked back and tried to say that this is all danger, but he barely managed to even keep his balance. Fortunately, at that moment, one of the knights ran up. They surrounded Fiona and told her to run as fast as possible because otherwise she would get hurt. The girl was a little surprised. She immediately looked back in order to understand what had happened. After all, until this moment, everything was perfectly calm. But as soon as she turned around, someone suddenly grabbed her hand. It turned out to be the same guy who was wounded. He put her on the ground and covered her with his body. By that moment, more knights came running to this monster. They tried to warn everyone else so that they were ready for the attack. Also, one of the knights approached Lady Mage and asked if everything was okay with her. At the same time, Fiona was very surprised to look at this guy who was breathing very hard. She noticed that the monster was aiming in her direction, and if he had not pushed them away, she would have died. At first, she thought that he was already dead. However, somehow he turned out to be alive. Yes, he saved her. She did not understand at all what to do to him. The injury most likely worsened due to the fact that he rolled over on his arm, and she could not understand why he did it. After all, they were not even acquaintances. Also, she could not avoid the giant while she was sitting with him, so she needed to quickly come up with a new plan to deal with this situation. At the same time, the giant again began swinging his huge hand in order to hit the children. One of the knights noticed this and immediately began to warn everyone around. At the same time, she was watching him intently, and she began to activate her magic so that he would not hit them after all. She used such strong magic that she was still able to knock down this giant. After that, she happily smiled and said that it was over with him now. However, at that moment, she felt a strong dizziness. Fiona really felt very bad. She assumed that using too much magic was harmful for her. However, compared to the guy who had already started to lose consciousness again, she was even normal. After that, the knights immediately ran up to her and asked if everything was okay with her. The girl immediately answered that everything was fine with her. Then she looked at the guy and noticed that he still lost consciousness. And at that moment, when she finally found herself very close to him and looked closely at his face, one thought suddenly came to her mind. There was an old outfit that did not imply that he was a mercenary, and he also had hair as dark as the night sky. He also had beautiful turquoise gray eyes, an appearance that stood out even under a layer of mud. She didn't recognize him at first because he was much younger than she imagined. And all because this guy was the main character, Sergey. And as soon as this realization came to Fiona, she was incredibly amazed. However, it was still very many years before the beginning of the original story, so Fiona still could not understand why this man was now lying right in front of her nose. She even thought about the fact that it might be the moment when he was supposed to meet Abel. But then she realized that now was absolutely not the time for her to think about all this. If he is really the same hero who was supposed to save the world, then his death would mean the end of the world. So Fiona had to save him at any cost. The girl shouted loudly to the knights and asked them to call a doctor as soon as possible because he needed an ambulance. And from that moment, a few days passed. Fiona still brought this boy to the estate where she lived and also asked Abel to send a doctor to him. After the next morning examination, the doctor said that despite the fact that it was a very serious injury, fortunately the crisis passed. When Fiona heard it, she was incredibly happy. She couldn't believe that it was really true. After that, the doctor gave her a few more recommendations and said that if she needed anything else, she could of course call him at any time. For her, it was really a huge relief. She sat down on a stool next to the boy and thought that she still managed to prevent the apocalypse that could happen at any moment. However, then she thought about it and realized that she would hardly be praised if he really turned out to be the hero she thought about. Sergey at that moment should have been about 14 years old. Despite the fact that in the original plot he did not have a full backstory, she was still able to think through several basic details in advance. For example, as with most of the main characters, Sergey's birth contained a secret and mystery. He was the prince of the empire in which she was at that time. He was a secret, illegitimate child. If he speaks more accurately, his mother was a commoner, and many people wanted him dead, considering him a stain in their eyes. Since his childhood, he was constantly in danger. So Sergey's mother tried to flee to another country in order to at least protect her son, who had been attacked more than once. In the end, in the forest, when she saw that they were chasing her. Earlier, she put him in the bushes and told him to hide and in no case show himself to anyone. The boy, of course, was at a loss. He did not understand what his mother was saying. But the woman finally hugged him and said that everything would be fine with her and that they would see each other later. She died when she tried to escape. In the end, Sergey found her lifeless body covered in blood. He cried lying next to his mother. He could not believe that he had lost the only thing that was important to him. In this way, Sergey was completely alone at such a young age. After that, he ran away to Kai to the north. He did so because Hylon was located in the far corners of the empire, where people who wanted him dead could reach them. Later, Abel learns that Sergey wields a sword and he had to take him to his students. This was the end of the entire description of Sergey's childhood, and the short story he told the main character in the original plot. Since the past is nothing but the basis from which his personality was born, moreover, it was also the basis for the entire fantasy of history. Now, when Fiona thought about the fact that the boy had survived all these events, they really seemed incredibly cruel to her, and she was very ashamed of the fact that she had invented this cruel story at all. I patted him on the head. She said that she was really sorry because he went through a lot even at a very young age. Fiona thought they would leave this place at a convenient time for themselves. However, even in this case, she had to treat him very well in order to avoid repeating the original story. In addition, she knew that Sergey was supposed to kill her a little later. According to the plot, just in case, it would be best for her to be friends with him from the beginning, and not to start a feud. She thought that she would take care of him from the bottom of her heart, so that he should be smart when he grows up and just leave her at least alive. In fact, she was so worried about Sergey that she couldn't even sleep properly all this time. Therefore, Fiona was incredibly tired and even decided to rest a little. Due to the fact that he was still unconscious, the girl lay down on the edge of his bed and decided to just close her eyes for a minute in order to relieve the sharp pain. But in the end, she didn't even notice how the girl fell asleep. She decided that she would think about everything later, when Sergey would already be conscious and she would be able to solve the questions as they came. Some time has passed since then, and Fiona woke up in a panic that she had overslept. And when the girl turned her head to the side, she saw that it was Sergey who was looking at her. She did not understand why she felt his gaze and assumed that it was precisely because of this that she woke up so suddenly. She decided that it would be best to try to establish contact with him now, so she smiled. Now that his eyes were open and the tone of his face was normal, Fiona noticed that he really was a very handsome guy. She assumed that it might be because of his youth. However, he looked like an evil cat. She thought that he would feel relaxed because he was the main character. However, she was really mistaken in assuming so. She thought that as soon as he woke up, he would thank her for saving him. But in reality, Sergey only looked at her with a very serious and distant look. The man was really not enough. After a short silence, he finally spoke and asked where he was. All she said was that he was in the castle of Highland. And after that, she introduced herself so that he would know how to contact her. Also, she asked what his name was. The guy called his name, and after that he looked at his hands, which were all in bandages. He asked in a surprised voice how he was able to survive. At that moment, the girl perfectly understood that he really did not remember how he tumbled over her in his arms. She also decided that he really was the real main character, because he helped others even when he was unconscious. But she didn't tell him about all of this, so she just said that she brought him to this place and asked the doctor to cure him. But Sergey, I still continued to do this. They will be very surprised. But despite the fact that Sergey was making a rather strange expression on his face, Fiona was most concerned about his physical state. Of course, this man could be the main character in the story. However, he is still a child, and there was a huge difference between her imagination and the reality that she eventually came face to face with. Moreover, Fiona was overwhelmed by the terrible sense of guilt that she felt when she saw Sergey's injuries with her own eyes. It was very serious, and she did not understand why she gave the hero such a difficult past. She reached out to take his hand, but the man quickly pulled her away from him. Fiona at the same time wondered if he had a temperature, because during this time she could rise again, and it would not be very good. But the guy only said that she wouldn't even dare to touch him. Fiona asked in a calm voice that in that case he would tell her if he was in pain. Sergey, for reasons unknown to her, continued to get angry. He shouted loudly and said that he could take care of himself, so he asked her to leave and not to annoy him even more. Fiona touched his ribs and the boy immediately felt an incredibly strong pain. There, he could not even restrain the scream that broke out of his chest. In fact, it does not matter how much a 14-year-old child can pretend, as long as he was always present beyond his capabilities, and he immediately becomes visible. Sergey immediately grabbed the painful spot for which the girl took him and looked at her with a look filled with hatred. He wondered what all this meant. Fiona also looked at him with a malicious look now and said that now he was in intensive care, and if he was in pain somewhere, he had to tell her about it immediately. Sergey immediately turned away from her. He asked why she had all this. After all, they had just met. He thought it was strange. But Fiona, smiling happily, wondered if he didn't save her, and if it wasn't supposed to be, now her debt will be repaid to him in the same way. The guy was very surprised when he heard this. He immediately asked what she was saying at all, because he wouldn't have done exactly that. But at that moment, the door to the room opened and Abel walked in. And the children immediately fell silent. They both looked at the man, who looked incredibly serious. He immediately started yelling at the girl as soon as he saw that she was sitting next to the boy and told the girl that she was still too early to bring the man home. Fiona heard this and was very surprised. She immediately told him that he was still quite a boy and not a man. But the Duke was absolutely indifferent to it. He said that it was one and the same. Therefore, the rules applied to all males. She looked at him in surprise. She thought that apparently he was in a bad mood, and because of this, he decided to lash out at her. Also, she was going to try not to aggravate the situation. Therefore, in a calm voice, Fiona inquired for what reason he came to this place. And at the same time, he looked at Sergey and said with a malicious smile that it was all because of him. He went around the bed from the other side and said that apparently, while he was not there, the second ballast had flown to his ship. Fiona heard this and was very surprised. She could not believe that by saying this, he also implies that she was the first burden on his neck. But she didn't pay too much attention to it, so she told the Duke that for some time this guy would be treated in her room, because early on it was really serious and she couldn't just let him go. And Belle then, continuing to look at Sergey, became interested in who this guy worked for, because he was completely unlike a child from their lands. When Fiona heard this, she seriously realized that she had never thought about who Sergey worked for. This information she could not even imagine. But the boy decided to answer this question himself and said that he worked for Carl's mercenary unit. Abel heard this and immediately began to doubt. He wondered if they had really stooped to the set of such young brats as he did. At that moment, Fiona began to worry a little because this was not at all what they could ask about. For some time, the boy looked at the man, and he looked at him. An awkward and very tense pause appeared between them, so Fiona immediately turned to Sergey and told him in his ear that this man was Duke Abel Halen. Sergey heard about this and immediately began to worry, because he assumed that this man might try to kill him. At that moment, Fiona suddenly started touching his forehead with her finger. He didn't like it at all, so he shouted at her. He moved away and asked her to stop. But Fiona replied with a happy smile that she just wanted to show her support and also tell him not to be nervous and not to worry because he was definitely safe here. Sergey didn't like it anyway, so he asked her to stop doing it. Otherwise, he would have to use force. The Duke then took her in his arms and began to lead her away from Sergey. He said that he had talked about the fact that it was still too early for her to do something like that. Therefore, it was best for her to stay away from him. Fiona absolutely did not understand why he was so worried. She said that he was only a child. Therefore, he should not have been afraid, but the Duke led her out of the room, holding her in his arms. In fact, this made her very uncomfortable because recently he often began to wear her in this way, and she always noticed the glances of the maids who were directed at him. The maids talked about how they looked exactly like father and daughter, and the more often the girl heard such words, the more this all began to worry her. However, they both had silver hair, so she could understand why all the servants around could think and count like that. While the Duke continued to carry her away, the girl decided to talk to him. Looking him straight in the eyes, Fiona wondered if this guy could stay in their estate until he recovers and can live normally on his own. The man was very surprised because it was the first time that Yes decided to ask him for something. The girl heard this and was even surprised. She didn't know that it was the first time. She explained that she really didn't need anything in particular, but Abel said that he didn't like her request. However, he agreed he was ready to give this guy a room so that he could recover peacefully and not occupy the girl's room. Fiona heard about it and was very surprised. She could not believe that the Duke was really ready to give this guy a separate room. But Abel did not understand why she was surprised, because she definitely could not think that he would allow her to stay with him in the same walls. Sergey heard all this and was very surprised. He started shouting again, asking what was wrong with the girl at all. He was interested in how well off the young lady was. Fiona did not react to this in any way. She only noticed that despite the fact that they met for the first time, he really hated her even from the very beginning. But she was not asked in luxury, and for this reason it was very difficult for her to even ask for anything now. But there was no particular need to tell Sergey the reason why she was in this estate. All that was required of him was to grow up safely, fall in love with the main character, and save this world. Of course, Fiona was going to follow this with the love of a mother. After all, it was she who created these characters. And she would be incredibly happy if they found happiness with each other. Therefore, smiling joyfully, she said that she was grateful in any case, and also added that she would work even harder to repay this wonderful service that the Duke had rendered her. But Abel replied that there were no problems in this. Everything was in order, and she was doing quite enough so that she could not worry about it. Then, Fiona heard that the Duke's tone was the same as always. However, the relationship became a little softer. She was embarrassed by the fact that she wasn't sure if he was good to her or not, and she really hoped that he wouldn't kick her out sooner than she expected. Fiona thought that all people were so complex and peculiar that it would take a lot of time to find a common language with them. At the same time, Sergey was lying in his bed and thought only about the words of his mother, who said before her death that he had to survive. All this time, the guy was working hard on it, and his mother was very worried about him until her last breath. The words that the boy must survive settled in him like a curse. Later, he went to a place where there was safety and as his mother had always wanted. And after he escaped the threat of life, he no longer had to worry about earning a living. Fortunately, he was allowed to do small work for a mercenary group. The pay was decent there. Thanks to this work, he did not die of hunger, but everything was not so sweet at this work. They made him do hard physical work, and all the other guys who were also in this detachment did not treat him kindly. The mercenaries ended up beating him for no reason, and because of this, his fragile little body was left with many scars of cuts and burns, which soon became a regular part of his daily routine. In the boy's head at that moment were only the words of his mother that he must survive. But all this was very difficult. In the moments when he was beaten again, he thought about why he should survive, because he saw absolutely no sense in all of this. He was incredibly lonely all this time, and he often imagined how nice it would be if someone would take care of him. Sergey very often thought about whether his insignificant life was worth something, because he understood that he would not be able to achieve anything in this way and did not see any meaning in it. Over time, the mercenaries began to work to protect the possession of Hylon and fought with monsters. It was very difficult for Sergey to do this. However, it brought quite good income, so he agreed to this business. In the detachment, they definitely did not give him a decent weapon, so he made do with a sword that he picked up on the field once. The only thing that was good in these battles was that, constantly risking her life, he was able to become stronger, and every time he killed many monsters, he told himself that he was able to survive. But everything did not go as smoothly as he thought. Soon the monsters became even more, and some of his comrades decided that the boy could become a wonderful human shield for them, while they left the battlefield, saving their worthless lives. Even at that moment, Sergey thought only that he had to live. But for some reason, he did not see a way to do it when demons surrounded him, and his assistants simply ran away without even turning around. Of course, Sergey could not help but continue killing these monsters in order to survive. But no matter how much his skills improved, it was still not enough. For this reason, one of the monsters was still able to wound him so badly that he fell to the ground. The boy could not move. A lot of blood poured out of his body. And at that moment, Sergey thought about the fact that maybe now the moment had come when death was waiting for him. And for some reason, it all started to calm him down even a little. The only thing he regretted was that he was dying because of such a scumbag as one of the knights who simply threw him on the field alone. He did it specifically in order to kill the boy. In fact, Sergey believed that if he was already destined to die, then he would want to die for someone like him, a brave and courageous right person. He would like to save someone weak because no one extended a helping hand to him when he needed it so much. It was for this reason that he hoped that he would be able to at least give this help to someone. However, when Sergey's strength left him, he realized that it was foolish to wish that others would live better than him, because it was precisely because of such thoughts that he was the first to die. Most of all, the Lego guy wanted to believe that his hopes were not in vain. He believed that somewhere there was light. Sergey believed that perhaps he himself would be able to become the source of this world. Then he suddenly felt that someone from the darkness began stroking his hair. It was so gentle that he even felt tears coming to his throat. After that, the man opened his eyes and noticed that he was in a completely unfamiliar room. For some time he was in a real panic, but when he saw that he was relatively safe, Sergey calmed down a little when he sat on the bed and saw a girl next to him. Of course, he was incredibly surprised to see this calmly fair-haired girl who was lying opposite him on the bed. But in fact, for him, it was the most peaceful scene he had seen in his entire tiring life. So for a while, he didn't even want to disturb her, but simply enjoyed the moment. Soon after that, breakfast was brought to the guy for the next day. Fiona asked how his wound was. She wanted to stretch and see what was wrong with her, but of course the guy didn't allow it. He, as always, pushed her hand away and said that he had told her not to touch him whenever she felt like it, because otherwise he would have to use self-defense. Fiona was very upset, because she thought that after this time this rule could go away. However, she was wrong in the end. The girl could not believe that it could be so difficult to recognize the main character in him. She was barely able to recognize his name, and certainly could not get close to him in any way because he simply did not allow her to do so. After breakfast was brought for Sergey, she sat down next to him and said that if something hurts him but he doesn't want her to look at it, she can tell the doctor about it and he will take care of everything himself. She asked if he agreed for a while. The guy was just silent. After that, he moved away from her further. He said that she was very strange. Fiona heard this. She was surprised. She thought that he was looking at her as some unknown entity, but she did not know what caused such an incomprehensible reaction to her. Sergey then asked in a rough voice why she cared so much about him. Was it really sympathy from a lady who didn't know about her problems because she was born with a golden spoon in her lips? But he didn't even have time to tell her anything. He said that he thought that for her he was like an abandoned dog or a cat, and it was for this reason that she tried so desperately to take care of him. Fiona was very surprised when she heard it. She couldn't believe that he could really imagine that. The girl immediately said that it wasn't like that at all. She suggested that Sergey considers her a close relative of Abel, and this means that he sees in her a protected noble lady who knew nothing about the world. She also assumed that he was incredibly angry that he had to rely on such a girl, whom he considered her, because he could not do anything about his injuries on his own. Fiona then took a mug of tea and answered that she did not have such low intentions, so he could not worry about it at all. The man still continued to get angry. He said that if she had no intentions towards the abandoned cat, then for what reason did she help him? Because he sincerely did not understand all of this. Of course, she believed that getting closer to him could be useful for her in the future. However, her attachment to a man named Sergey was no less important. Therefore, she smiled in a kind voice and asked if the simple desire to help him was not enough, and he did not believe that people really could help just like that. The man said that she definitely would not have saved a person whom she had just met without a reason for her own benefit. So it is natural that he did not believe in it. Fiona said that, by the way, it was all true. Perhaps he also had such thoughts when he saved her, and it was for this reason that she could now take care of him. Sergey heard this and was very surprised. He was silent for a while because he did not understand what she was talking about. But then he said that in fact it was all untrue and she was talking nonsense. So he said that only rich children like her lived with their naive thoughts. So he asked her to keep them to herself because it was unpleasant for him to hear about them. Fiona was now starting to get a little angry. All his statements were very sharp and unpleasant after all. She also helped in the battle, so she did not understand why he was so cruel to her. She had already turned to him and said that she is not just a lady who stays at everything ready, but suddenly her words were interrupted because there was a knock on their room. Fiona allowed to enter, and when she saw that it was a doctor, she greeted him with a joyful smile. When the man saw Lady Fiona, he also greeted her and said that he was surprised that she also decided to attend that day. The doctor also smiled happily and said that this is exactly what he was expecting. The girl did not respond to this because Sergey got up from his seat. He went to his doctor and told Fiona that she could already leave. But she did not do this. She replied that she would like to see how his wounds had healed during this time. Sergey sighed heavily and said that if she sees this sight, they will be lucky if she does not faint from one look at them, so he recommended that she really leave. But Fiona insisted on her point and said that she would try to control herself, and she herself thought that there were many terrible corpses on the battlefield. Therefore, when she saw the wounds, she would definitely be able to control herself. But Sergey didn't want all of this. He asked her to just leave because he couldn't do the dressing because of her. Because of this, they detained the doctor. Fiona decided not to annoy him even more. So she went out the door and thought that now he was at that age when he is already embarrassed to undress in front of other people. However, then she thought about it and realized that his side could also be quite nice. So in order for him to rest a little from her, she decided to leave and return to him later. At the same time, the doctor took out all his necessary equipment and turned to Sergey. He asked if the guy felt pain that night. The boy immediately answered that this was not so. After that, he took off his shirt, and under it, many different bandages were visible, as well as all those old scars that had not yet healed. Since that moment, quite a lot of time has passed. Fiona has already managed to return to his room after leaving, and was a little surprised because it took more time than she expected. She could not even expect that the dressing could take so much time. Fiona wanted to finish the dialogue that they had started because she, in general, also worked hard and did not understand why Sergey hated her so much and thought that she was completely useless. She had never thought about Sergey's childish nature, so she could not understand his ego at all. The original story was told from the person of the main heroine Yuria, and the role of Sergey was very simple in all this. He was a handsome and caring and devoted lover created only for Yuria. It is quite obvious that anyone would want the same soulmate, so he really fell in love with many readers. Sergey was the one who always believed in you and stayed by your side no matter where we were. However, it was difficult for Fiona to compare that personality with his childhood personality. She imagined herself only as Sergey, so she didn't know how she feels about him now. She even assumed that this was all possible because of her hidden motives. A mixture of feelings of attachment, guilt, and common sense made her want to get closer to him. However, he considered it excessive politeness and therefore pushed her away only further. If she had acted recklessly and made him hate her, then her future would definitely appear to be under great threat. So Fiona did not know what to do with her at all. At that moment, the girl suddenly heard how the door of Sergey's room finally opened and the doctor came out. He saw Fiona under the door. He was a little surprised and asked if everything was okay with the lady. She immediately rose to her feet and came closer to him and asked if they had finished. The man said that it was so. His wounds were healing very well and it was wonderful. However, everything was not so good. How could you imagine yourself? Fiona heard this and was immediately worried. She asked what was wrong. The doctor explained that this child, he had heard that the boy was a mercenary, but he was not sure that they would allow him to return even when he had fully recovered. He also said that the unconditional Sergey does not tell anything about himself. However, when he conducts an examination, he notices that his entire body is covered with old wounds that will never heal. Fiona heard about this and was very surprised. She could not just stand still, so she opened the door to Sergey's room and quickly ran in there, even without permission. She started shouting his name. The girl couldn't believe that it was all true. She didn't know that everything would be so bad, so she started blaming herself even more. After all, she did it all. Sergey saw her and was very surprised. He sent a glass of water that he had been drinking before and asked what was wrong and why she rushed into his room so abruptly. Fiona sat down next to him on the bed and began to ask him for forgiveness. She said that she was going to take off his clothes a little. At the same time, she pushed him down on the bed so that it would be easier for her to do it. The guy was very surprised. He immediately asked what she was talking about. Most importantly, why did she start doing this? He tried to push her away from himself, but it didn't work out. Fiona continued to apologize and said that she was really sorry. Sergey then asked her to stop doing it if she knew that they were acting so rudely and wrongly. But the girl did not stop. She continued to unbutton his shirt and said that it would take only 1 minute. She needed to see something, and then she would leave him alone. Then she touched his body and noticed that it was bumpy to the touch, and in some places there were also some strange dimples. Then the girl realized that these were indeed scars. After that, she finally lifted his shirt up and saw a terrible picture that she could not even imagine. These scars were absolutely all over her body. She couldn't understand how this could happen. She immediately felt extremely sorry for the guy, but Sergey at that moment was already angry to such an extent that he threw the girl away from him and shouted loudly that it was enough. Fiona was very surprised. She did not expect that he would push her so hard, so she could not stay on her feet and fell from the bed. It was quite a strong blow. The guy saw this and was very shocked and immediately felt guilty because he didn't want to push her so hard. After that, Sergey continued to shout at her and asked if she was made of feathers because he did not think that she would be so light that just by touching her, he would already become so strong. He wondered why it was so easy to push her away. But at that moment, Fiona burst into tears. She looked at him with tearful eyes and did not answer. When the guy saw this, he felt incredible shame. He immediately got off the bed and asked where she had hurt herself because she thought that she was in pain and because of this she was crying. He put his hand on her shoulder and asked her to talk to him and not cry so much. Sergey continued to ask her where it hurt, whether it was her shoulders or her legs. He wanted her to say something. Then he got to his feet and said that they should have called the doctor right now, because it could be something serious. Also, considering the fact that she didn't want to tell him, he was even more worried. But Fiona suddenly grabbed him by the shirt. He immediately wondered what happened this time. He was already afraid of any of her movements. Well, the girl continued to cry and said that she was fine and that it did not hurt at all. In fact, Fiona burst into tears because the scars covered every centimeter of Sergey's chest, arms, and sides. And these bruises were not just wounds, they were special burns. She knew that he had been consciously and regularly subjected to violence by the burning wounds. The wounds could tell about the long periods of cruelty and suffering that he had to go through. Therefore, Fiona looked at him with a very mournful look. She wondered who exactly left all these terrible wounds on his body. Sergey heard this immediately and suddenly became very serious. He realized that she was crying not at all because he pushed her, and because of this he became even more angry. Then he wondered if the doctor had told her about all this, and that is why she asked him to undress. Fiona immediately said that it was true. Then he sat down opposite her and scratched the back of her head and asked if it was because of these scars that tears suddenly appeared in her eyes. The girl didn't answer, but Sergey understood everything. He explained that this was why he told her to wait outside while they changed his bandages, because he knew that this picture would be unpleasant for her. He was surprised that she took it and cried when he saw the wounds that didn't even hurt him. He didn't even have time to negotiate this proposal when Fiona's friend rushed to his neck and started hugging him tightly. Of course, he was extremely surprised by this, but while Fiona was hugging him, she felt a strong smell of Sergey's drugs, and she felt incredibly sorry for this boy because he had to go through so much. And all this happened because of her. He experienced the most real and terrible torture. And all this happened even at an early age when he was still quite a child. Because of one sentence in which she mentioned his unhappy childhood, she now understood how important it was and affected him for the rest of his life. The difference between the text and reality was simply stunning. So Fiona could not hold back her emotions and burst into tears right in front of him. I continued to hug Sergey. She was interested in why everything happened like that, but the boy tried to calm her down and said that there was nothing wrong with it, and she did not need to worry so much. He also said that among the mercenaries there were simply rude people, and they beat him because he was the weakest among them all. This was the most common practice in such places. Then Fiona finally moved away from him and, looking Sergey straight in the eyes, asked him not to treat all of this as an ordinary matter. The guy saw and heard all this and was very surprised. He immediately wondered if she sympathized with him. She didn't answer anything. She just shook her head. In fact, it was more like a guilt before them. In fact, until now, she did not understand the non-existence of Sergey, the unreality of this world. She did not even realize this during the fierce battle in which she participated more than once. It seemed to her that all this was happening in some other distant universe. Or rather, that she simply ignored all this because she thought it would be easier for her. However, now when Fiona saw all these scars in person, she finally realized the truth. It was all her fault. Everything that happened to Sergey in childhood was because of her. She was incredibly ashamed of herself due to the fact that she complained about the difficulties of getting close to him, because she did not even imagine what tortures he had to go through. And even if Sergey from this moment on will continue to hate her, she still wanted to be next to him. She believed that this was the best thing she could do in order to apologize for all these scars that, in fact, she caused him. Taking Sergey by the hand, she looked him in the eyes again and said that she was really sorry that he had to go through something like that. The guy then happily smiled and asked if it was true that she was going to apologize for cutting him off in such an unceremonious way. But Fiona frowned and answered that it was not so. She said that it wasn't about that at all. At that moment, tears continued to flow down her cheeks. She couldn't control everything, so her voice even stuttered. Sergey was very uncomfortable because she was crying. He began to wipe the tears from her face and asked her to calm down already. The guy said that she had nothing to do with it, so there was no point in crying, because there was nothing to change the situation. So he didn't understand why she was so strict with herself. Even when Sergey behaved very rudely, his touch remained tender all the same. Therefore, Fiona still decided to take control of her emotions. She put her hands on his cheeks and told Sergey that this time she wanted him not to hurt her. She thought that it might be able to act like a spell. However, she wasn't sure about it. But still, she just decided to try. Until the main character appeared in this world, the wounds on Sergey's heart would not heal anyway. And even so, Fiona was still going to protect him until then. She very much hoped that this little desire would weaken his wariness towards her. And at that moment, she had already stopped crying. The girl suddenly began to smile. And after that, she laughed it all. Fiona said that she really wanted them to live together for the rest of their lives and stop attacking each other like angry dogs. Sergey looked into her eyes for a while. He didn't understand what was wrong with her, but then he defiantly turned away from her. In a particularly displeased voice, he said that at first she cried for no reason, and then she laughed. And now she was talking all sorts of nonsense, and he really couldn't understand her. In any case, he said that she could do as she wanted. At that moment, his cheeks even reddened a little because he was very embarrassed. Fiona at that moment was very happy. She assumed that most likely he was not against it, so at the moment she was satisfied with it. She thought that she would definitely become a good friend for him, because that's exactly what he deserved. After that, Fiona still managed to get a little closer to Sergey, and their relationship stopped being as strained as it was before. Despite the fact that she was not sure whether it was a misunderstanding on her part, at least Sergey did not push her away and did not tell her not to touch him again. They began to spend more time with each other. And this was indeed a huge achievement for Fiona, considering all the previous unsuccessful attempts. She also believed that if Sergey had been constantly abused before, then it was quite natural that he would be sensitive to physical contact, and it was not at all surprising that he was so strict about her not touching him. Looking back, Fiona now thought that his reluctance was connected not so much with physical contact as with the fact that she would have discovered his scars. So now that she knew about them, he began to feel more relaxed. On one of the beautiful sunny days, Fiona went to the guy and wanted to eat cookies with him, but she didn't even have time to knock on the door when suddenly she saw that he had opened it. The girl immediately put the box in his hands and pushed him back into the room, saying that his injury was getting worse. So as she said, he couldn't move. Sergey tried to inform her that everything was fine with him and he was already almost healthy, but she was not going to listen to all this. The girl continued to insist on her own. Closing the door behind him, Fiona said that he couldn't do it anyway until he fully recovered. She wasn't going to let him in. She asked him to listen to the words of his older sister and not do as he thought, because it would be better for her to know what was best. Sergey thought that it was useless to argue with her, so he sat down at a table near the window and said that he was very interested in why she called herself an older sister, because he still did not know how old she was. The girl was a little worried when she heard this. Then she quickly came up and sat opposite him. In fact, she knew that physically she was an hour younger. Then Fiona told her age. Sergey was a little surprised to hear it. He said that she turned out to be older than he thought. It seemed to him that she was about 10 years old, but definitely not 13. When she heard this, she was amazed at the fact that Abel told her every day that she was so small. However, she could not imagine that she was so small that people could really think that she was much younger than she really was. However, she understood that she couldn't do anything about it, since she didn't have a refrigerator in the attic when she was a child. And because of this, her body couldn't grow normally like her peers. When Sergey took the cookie, he smiled happily and said that in any case it meant that he was just an hour older than her. But Fiona started to argue and said that in general her psychological age was older than his. But keep smiling, the guy said that it was her personal delusion. He also added that Duke Halen fed her well, and for this reason, he wondered why she hadn't grown at least a little. Sighing heavily, Fiona said that she actually didn't know. The girl had really bad endurance. Therefore, after using magic, she could not use it again for some time. It was more like the ability to run short distances, but not long ones. Fiona looked away and said that from this moment she was going to try hard to grow up so that everything was in order and very soon she would definitely be able to reach the norm. Sergey then even laughed and said that it would really be better for her to make more efforts because otherwise she will only continue to decrease. Now, when the guy's condition really improved and his mental balance stabilized, Fiona began to look as if he was carved from ivory. She was looking forward to the future. Despite the fact that he was her child, she really wanted him to use his dazzling beauty on the main character and conquer her heart. When Fiona stared at him with a fixed gaze, Sergey was very uncomfortable because of this. He even thought at some point that there was something wrong with his face. Well, the girl explained that she looked at him like that because she thought he was handsome and also advised him not to forget his principles when he starts dating girls. And she thought that even if it was him, she wouldn't forgive anyone. Who would make her beautiful heroine cry because that girl was truly amazing and deserved the best? Sergey said that he thinks about it every day. However, sometimes Fiona was really unusual. The girl already wanted to ask what he meant. However, she did not have time. The guy came closer to her and stroked her head and said that he did not know whose psychological age was older, but judging by her actions, she did not know how scary people could be. But Fiona began to get indignant, said that he was definitely wrong. She already wanted to bring him several arguments, but at that moment the door to the room suddenly opened. Jerome ran inside very quickly. He turned to Lady Fiona and said that a huge monster was approaching the second wall. The man replied that apparently the entire military force had to gather. Once they had called her too, Fiona immediately got up from her seat and ran to the exit. She replied that she would go there now. Jerome thanked her for this. They were both about to leave when suddenly Sergey grabbed her hand and pulled her closer to him and asked what she was doing. The girl heard this question. She was surprised. And Sergey continued to ask why she had to go there. After all, he really didn't understand. Then Fiona remembered that she had not yet told Sergey that she was a magician who volunteered to participate in the war. Therefore, she decided that this was the best opportunity to explain everything to him. She explained that she was a mage who fights in this place. Her main job is to protect the second wall. Sergey was very surprised when he only heard this, but Fiona asked him to let her go because she really needed to hurry before everything went down there. The guy continues to squeeze her hand tightly and answered that this is all. It was senseless that he did not understand how she could ask for something like that right now. He told Fiona that the second wall was the most dangerous place on the entire continent, so he did not understand how she could even voluntarily go there. He also asked if she understood at least all this, because even mercenaries and knights who spent their whole lives on the battlefield could die in the blink of an eye, because the monsters there were very cruel. Sergey asked how a child like her could protect such a place. He finally let go of Fiona, and, approaching Jerome, began to shout loudly at him and told him to at least say something reasonable. Was it really that the strongest northern count of Halen Castle was so short of men that they were sending a child to the battlefield? Continuing to shout, he asked if the situation was so bad that no one except a small child could provide them with protection. Jerome was very surprised. He did not expect that the boy would start yelling at him so much, and there was nothing to answer him. He did not understand how he should explain this situation. Then Fiona began to panic very much. Dasha thought that Jerome might expel the guy for such behavior, so she decided to intervene in their dispute. The girl took Sergey by the hand and pulled him away and told him to stop. In fact, she perfectly understood why he was angry. He always had a strong sense of justice. That's how Fiona prescribed this character. So she believed that he didn't like the fact that someone like her was being sent to the battlefield. Sergey immediately asked what she wanted, but Fiona replied that everything was fine. So he didn't have to worry about it. She always had everything under control. As soon as he heard that it was a table even more, he turned to her and asked if she really wants to say that she is not afraid of everything. The girl replied that she actually had nowhere else to go, so she didn't see the point. And they were afraid because it was her job. Sergey heard this and was very surprised. He looked at her, not understanding what exactly she meant when she said these words. In a calm voice, the girl explained that she needed to stay somewhere and the Hale Duchy needed a magician, so she considered it mutually beneficial and did not think that she should be angry because of all this. First of all, staying in this place was exclusively her decision, so she believed that there was no need to condemn or be angry that she was sent to very dangerous places. It was exclusively Fiona's choice from the very beginning. She needed somewhere to live until she reached adulthood, and Halen needed a very strong magician to control the borders. That's the only thing that mattered at that moment, so she certainly wasn't going to complain or seek justice in all of this. Sergey then asked about her family. Did they not worry at all about where exactly they sent her? In a calm voice, she explained that she was an illegitimate child. Her father, brothers, and sisters themselves sent her to this place. They really hoped that she would never return to them again, so of course they certainly shouldn't have worried that something might happen to her. They rather hoped that something bad would happen to her. Of course, Fiona knew that Sergey understood her very well because he had gone through something similar. No one has to protect you if you're a bastard, and this person must pay a certain price in order to save his life, so such people always had to pay a cruel price for their childhood. The boy still continued to insist on his ego. His hand weakened a little, and he said in a low voice that she might die there and asked if she was not afraid of this at all. Fiona replied that if she dies, it means that she was not smart enough to live. In any case, she was in this place voluntarily, so he didn't have to worry, because she definitely wasn't against all this, so she didn't need protection. Sergey was still amazed when he heard it. Then Fiona was finally able to free her hand and said that it was really time to go. She also said that he must be careful and once again not to disturb his wound. He also needed to eat well in order to restore his strength. Sergey heard this and was genuinely amazed. He immediately asked why she cared so much about him, and even began to set some limits for him herself while going into a very dangerous place. The girl replied that she thought it was quite natural to look after those who were injured, so she did not understand his surprise. The boy didn't answer anything else after that. She went out the door, and as soon as they closed, Sergey told her in a low voice to come back as soon as possible. Fiona actually heard him say something but could not understand that at that very moment she saw that Jerome was already standing next to her. Looking at him, she asked him for forgiveness for being late. But as soon as she looked up, she saw that Abel, who was no longer fat, was standing next to her. And at that moment, Fiona realized that he must have heard the whole conversation, and because of this, she became a little worried. When she looked at Abel, she noticed that he had a rather strange expression on his face. She even thought that he was angry for some reason. In fact, Fiona had already spent a lot of time talking to the boy, even though they were in a hurry, so it's quite logical that the man didn't like it at all. For this reason, she directly asked him for forgiveness for being late. The man already wanted to tell her something. However, he decided that he wanted to aggravate the situation. Abel said that this was not at all something that should be discussed in this place, so he took her in his arms and they went to the story they needed. On the way, the man turned to Fiona and said that she should be with him when they arrive on the battlefield. It was very important. The girl was a little surprised. However, she said that she understood everything and would be by her side, but she didn't understand why he told her this at all. It was unusual for her because he was always by her side during the battle, so she didn't understand why it was just a clarification. But they spent the rest of the time in silence. On that day, they could not successfully defend the second fortress wall, and after that, they lived a really ordinary life for a while. Apart from all this, there was also a slight change in her relationship with Sergey. They became now even more friendly to each other. When he found out that she was a magician, he stopped behaving with her as harshly as he had done before. And Fiona really liked it, because before that, his harshness was too great. Well, sometimes they talked, and for some reason Sergey threw a rather confused look at her. Because of this, the girl felt uncomfortable. She did not understand why he was doing that. Fiona probably thought that she was somehow strange to him, but she didn't focus on it, so she just tried to ignore it. In the end, Sergey's wounds finally healed, and they ran out of excuses to keep him in the castle for the rest of his time. However, it seemed very wrong to send him back to the fourth wall. After all, the mercenaries who mocked him were still there. Fiona didn't know what she had to do in this situation, so for the rest of the days she walked and thought about a new plan of action. While she was walking around the estate and thinking about what she should do to Fiona, a maid suddenly approached her and said that the Duke had summoned her to his office. Hearing this, she was a little surprised. However, she went to him. In reality, Abel has always fought alongside her in battle, and the fact that he accompanies her means that he doesn't trust her or her skills, and therefore has to be always there to control everything. When Fiona knocked on the door, she heard the Duke's voice saying that a girl could come in. At the same time, the man was sitting at his desk, and as soon as Fiona approached him and asked why he called her, only then did he tear himself away from his papers. Abel looked at her and said that most likely the conversation will be long, therefore he told her to sit down. His voice sounded very strict and serious, so the girl was really alarmed. And besides, since recently for some reason he began to call her by her name, Abel said that according to the doctor, the boy whom she saved was already completely healthy. Fiona heard this and immediately realized that he probably wanted her to just take him and put him out the door. However, she still hadn't decided what she needed to do with the mercenaries. He reacted a little nervously. She said that in fact he had really recovered. She already wanted to say something else but didn't have time. Sighing heavily, Abel said that she probably already knew that he did not like to bring strangers to the castle. The girl replied that she had actually noticed this peculiarity in him. The girl then noticed that he was quite seriously thinking about something. She did not understand what exactly, and because of this she continued to worry. It was all very strange for her. But Abel said that he had something interesting and wondered if she had let this unfamiliar guy in only because she already knew in advance who he was. As soon as Fiona heard this question, she immediately assumed that for some reason the man himself knew about Sergey's personality in advance, and that is why he began to ask her strange questions. Then he probably already knew that Sergey was also a prince. In such cases, she had only one way out, which she was going to use directly. Smiling innocently, Fiona said that she actually had no idea what he was talking about. She decided to pretend that she didn't really know this person. She believed that it would be quite suspicious if a bastard of a noble family knew the secret of the imperial family. So she believed that it would be safest for her to use exactly such tactics. Fiona explained that she only knew that Sergey was an orphan and he did small jobs for mercenaries. The man heard this and immediately began to look intently at the girl. In fact, at that moment, it seemed to her as if he was looking straight into her soul and thus trying to find out if she was lying to him or not. She herself at that moment was right inside in panic and hysterics. Fiona really hoped that soon he would simply forget about all this and stop looking at her like a criminal. Finally, after a short silence, Abel said that compared to her, there was nothing special about this bastard. He said that he doesn't really know who she really is. Sometimes Fiona looks like an ordinary innocent child of her age, and when he is convinced of this, she is in a second moment more rational and cold-blooded than anyone else, so he himself does not know what he could think about her at all. When Fiona heard this, she was a little surprised. In fact, she did not know that the man had exactly such an opinion about her, so she said that she considered herself quite normal. Well, the man answered that it was only she who thought so. Someone else would definitely consider her a genius. Then, smiling, Abel also said that, in fact, he thought for a long time whether he should be careful around her or whether it would be better to take her in. He was very glad that she was strong and talented. However, her uniqueness could also be a double-edged sword. Hearing all this, Fiona immediately began to suspect bad things, and in an alarmed voice she asked if he was going to kick her out. Abel replied that in fact everything was quite the opposite. He was going to leave her. So he thought that it would be good to gradually give her an additional task so that she would not get bored. As soon as Fiona heard this and saw the papers in his hands, she was incredibly happy. Her eyes lit up with joy and she said that she was ready for this. She really was very happy. After all, this sign of attention meant that she could no longer worry about being kicked out, so she could relax. In fact, Abel was hostile to the imperial family, and when they sent a strange girl as support, he had no choice. Of course, he began to suspect her, and even more so considering the fact that Fiona did not always behave according to her age. He had more and more questions, but she was glad that everything happened like that. Abel replied that recently, there were complaints from the residents of the Fourth Wall. It turns out that the mercenaries behaved aggressively there and molested local girls. In fact, at that moment his voice became very rough and he could not imagine that these scoundrels dared to touch the inhabitants of the land he was defending. Their courage should have been worthy of respect. Fiona was even a little scared when she saw his obsessed look, but at that moment the man handed her the paper and told her to read it carefully. Taking them in her hands, the girl saw that the whole story of this situation was written there, and she noticed a rather familiar name there, and soon realized that this was a group with which Sergey was. Now she finally began to guess why Abel decided to entrust this task to her. She assumed that the guy understood her biggest current problem even without mentioning it, and thus was able to help her solve it. She was very happy. Smiling happily, the man turned to Fiona and said that he was temporarily ready to give her the right to lead the soldiers from the fourth wall. She had to make these arrogant idiots pay for everything they did. He also said that his proud hero would repay tenfold both for mercy and for evil, so everyone had to keep this in mind. As soon as Fiona heard all this, even goosebumps ran through her body. She realized the fact that this place definitely had a special style, and she was not going to violate it. In the end, Abel said that the child she was so worried about, they were going to go to the fourth wall with him anyway. Therefore, he told her to figure it all out while they were there, so she could save time and solve the problem that arose there. Fiona then took with her the wallet that he gave her and said with confidence in the voice that he could definitely rely on her. She would handle all this very well. And when some time had passed since that moment, they finally set off together with Sergey towards the fourth wall due to the fact that it was quite far outside the window of their carriage, and it was even visible how the snow had fallen. When the girl saw him, she was delighted. She immediately noticed that someone from the residence was making a snowman and became interested. Maybe they should have stopped and done it. Sergey heard this and was very dissatisfied. He wondered why they had to stop halfway and sculpt some unnecessary snowman. He clearly did not like this idea. Fiona saw his facial expression right away. She wondered why he was so sullen at all. She asked if he couldn't at least once act like a child and be happy even just by looking at the snow. But the guy turned away from her and answered that it was better to be sullen than to laugh stupidly like her. The girl absolutely did not like the tone with which he spoke to her, and he sighed heavily. She asked if he was still upset that she had not told him in advance about going to the battlefield. As soon as Sergey heard that she thought he was upset, he said that it was all nonsense and asked her not to think too much about herself. Fiona noticed that he looked quite irritable. She didn't understand why it was like that, so she even got a little upset, assuming that it was because of her. And when the guy saw her sad expression on his face, he sighed heavily and said that if she had more time, he would certainly be able to help her with modeling. But first, she had to finish what Duke Fiona had entrusted to her. Hearing this, she immediately shone with happiness. She said that he had promised her, so she would remember it. She also said that after completing the Duke's assignment, she would like them to play together. Sergey didn't answer that. He just thought about it all. The guy didn't understand that there could be so much fun in playing with a bastard like him. He doesn't know what girls of his age like to do. That's why he was a little uncomfortable. He couldn't even think of a single good word to say to Fiona. And besides, he still couldn't believe that this girl could be the most real magician. He suggested that perhaps it was difficult for him to accept this fact due to the fact that he had not seen her in battle. And besides, she looked like a winter fairy from a fairy tale. Sergey noticed that her eyes were red like roses, and her hair was white as if it were snow, not counting the fact that her skin looked even lighter. He considered her simply incredible. She looked like a cute white rabbit that runs and jumps in the snow. But this tiny child eventually turned out to be a mage who defended the most dangerous wall in the entire empire. And that's why everything was so strange to him. She was also very angry with those terrible people who forced such a child to be in an incredibly dangerous situation. And of course, he was angry with this unbearable child for the fact that she simply accepted and put up with this whole situation. The girl did not want to fight and live. She simply accepted everything that turned out to be. Sergey thought that instead of worrying about him, she should have thought about her own safety because in such a dangerous situation, she could lose her life at any moment. Also, he did not understand why such a girl was worried about someone like him at all. He didn't know who the orphan from the group of mercenaries could be worried about and assumed that maybe she knew that he had imperial blood and that's why she treated him that way. He believed that she could do it to kill or even take advantage of him, of course. He would very much like to believe Fiona, but he could not afford it. He would not have been able to survive her betrayal, so it was easiest for Sergey to just continue not to trust her. Then suddenly Fiona noticed that he was seriously thinking. Therefore, having moved closer to him, she called him again, because he did not respond the previous times. When the guy finally heard her, he immediately asked what she wanted. Fiona answered that she would like to know what rules the mercenaries had, whether there was a hierarchy in their lives. Well, the guy answered that, in fact, it was all there, only the strongest survived. These people bowed to the subjects who were stronger and dominated the subjects who were weaker than them. Sergey also said that if she wants to rule the mercenaries to me, she must show that she is a real threat to them so that they start to fear her and obey her accordingly. Hearing this, Fiona immediately replied that everything was clear to her, and she herself thought that this was a typical situation when the strong controlled the weak. It was not a new system for her at all. In fact, she believed from the beginning that she had to punish them severely and only thus confirmed her theory. She believed that in this way they would all understand, no matter how stupid they were, who exactly they should obey, and also that they should not violate the established rules under any circumstances. Smiling, she thanked Sergey and said that this would really help her. The guy didn't respond to that. He didn't understand why she was so polite to him. They drove in silence for a while, and then Sergey couldn't stand it and asked why she had started asking so harshly about how to treat mercenaries. Fiona immediately told him the truth that it was all because of the Duke's orders, and she was interested because she didn't know anything about the mercenaries, so it was considered that it would be nice to know everything in advance. Sergey heard this and was immediately alarmed. He wondered what exactly the Duke had ordered her to do. Fiona was about to say something to him when suddenly the carriage suddenly stopped, and she could barely hold herself in place so as not to fall. Sergey was amazed. He wondered why the carriage could stop so abruptly, because usually they drove smoothly. But the girl then looked out the window and asked him to look there too. After all, they were already on the spot, respectively, and the carriage stopped. They finally arrived at the fourth wall. As soon as Fiona looked out the window, she saw civilians walking calmly along the narrow streets of their city. She suddenly opened the door and, going outside, said that she had to finish Abel's task immediately. Fiona was about to go downstairs when suddenly she felt Sergey's hand on her wrist. She immediately looked at him in surprise and asked why he did it. And the guy who pulled her closer to him said that the carriage is quite high and she will fall if she just starts going out like that. Therefore, he went out first and gave her his hand, told her to take his hand and go down carefully so as not to hurt herself anywhere. Fiona heard all this and was very surprised for a while, and she stood in the passage in amazement looking at the hand extended to him. After this, the girl suddenly laughed loudly. Sergey heard it. He was very surprised by it, even though it hurt him a little. He was interested. For what reason did she suddenly start laughing like that? Well, Fiona asked for forgiveness after all. She put her hand in the ego and began to descend. Sergey considered her a rather strange girl who was cute, even with an unfamiliar guy like him, although he could not trust her care and kindness, but he still remained in debt to her. Therefore, he believed that at least he had to treat the girl politely, because she did not deserve to be treated badly. When Fiona finally went downstairs, she smiled and thanked Sergey for his help. The guy thought that if he did such things, he might someday be able to repay her for saving his life. And then all of a sudden, a thought came into his head that he really wanted to be a little better, because Fiona didn't deserve to be treated badly. After some time, they came to the right building and Fiona handed a special note to the commander. As soon as the man saw it, he was very surprised and asked if it was true. She smiled and replied that of course it was true. It should have had the Duke's seal on it, so it proved the authenticity of the necessary documents. The knights looked at her with disbelief and said that they were both small children, so he thought that it was absolutely impossible. After that, in a rough voice, he advised Fiona to stop playing with them and talking nonsense and to return home as soon as possible, because her mother was probably already worried about her there. But Fiona, in principle, expected a similar reaction because no one on the fourth wall had even heard of her, so she had to earn her reputation anew. After looking at this man, she asked for forgiveness and said that, believe her or not, it was only his choice. However, she wondered if he could cope with the consequences. The man then started looking at the documents again and said that when he read it all over again, it really looked like the truth. When Fiona started to threaten him, she noticed that now the guy has become more formal, so maybe she will be lucky and he will finally allow her to the right place. Then the girl bowed and introduced herself. She said that she had arrived in this place and received an order to deal with unpleasant incidents that occurred on the territory of the fourth wall. One of the knights said that he understood everything after that, turning to Miss Fiona and asking if she happened to know what exactly the incidents were because he didn't quite understand. The girl immediately said that of course she knew everything, because she studied everything in this document. And Fiona said that if he didn't trust her until now, she could tell the contents of everything. The man immediately began to worry very much and stopped her, and said that everything was fine. He also asked her to let him know how exactly he could help her. All she said was that firstly, she wanted the military to catch the criminals, and secondly, to gather everyone in the village square. Finally, she also had one more condition, but before that, she turned to Sergey. She asked if he knew where all the mercenaries usually gathered. He answered that they were usually in the bar near the wall. That's where they spent most of their time. Fiona, smiling, immediately turned to those knights and began to tell about her third condition. From that moment, some time passed, and now they were finally freed. Together with Sergey, she went outside and stretched and said that the preparation was finally completed. It took much more strength from her than the girl expected. She also wondered if it was true that despite the fact that they looked down on her because of her age, would they be able to do the job well that she entrusted to them? Sergey answered that it would be more likely if he paid them generously. And after that, he asked what exactly the Duke had entrusted to her. In fact, Fiona had her own future plans for the mercenaries. She is not sure what exactly she will do. However, she definitely did not intend to let them go just like that. Judging by the way Abel behaved, she believed that a possible punishment would include cutting off some part of the body. So she believed that it would be quite worthy. She also knew that Sergey was only 14 years old, so it was best not to tell him all these details. When Sergey began to question her in more detail, the girl still said that he had said to pass a fair sentence and return back. Since Sergey did not go with her, she thought that it was possible to express herself vaguely so that he would no longer ask unnecessary questions and would not suspect anything. Smiling, Fiona looked at her partner and wondered if it was true that he wouldn't go. So she didn't see the point in telling him about everything clearly. But the guy interrupted her and said that he actually wanted to go with her. When Fiona heard about this, she was very surprised. She immediately asked what he was talking about, and the guy repeated that he would go with her on this task. When he saw Fiona's rather sharp reaction, he wondered if she didn't want him to be present. The girl began to worry a little and said that of course it wasn't like that. Then Fiona explained that it might be too cruel for children, so she didn't want all of this to cause him even more trauma. Well, this did not affect Sergey, he asked in a skeptical voice. Did she forget that he was the one who fought on the battlefield? According to this, he was definitely not scared. He also said that the scars she saw all over his body were old and not recent. Therefore, he knew that she might not believe him because of their first meeting. However, he was indeed quite a talented person and a knight, so he could stand up for himself. But the girl replied that of course she knew that. However, she wondered how it could be connected with the fact that he wants to go there with her. She really didn't understand what this relationship could have to Sergey. But the guy replied that this is not what he had in mind, so he decided to explain it more clearly to her. Sergey said that in any case, he is trying to say that if she needs it, he can certainly become her shield so that this does not happen. He explained that most of the local idiots did not look at her kindly, and two were always better than one. He didn't even look her in the eyes because he was so worried and embarrassed. That's why he said these words. He went ahead and also added that if she understood everything, then they didn't need to delay. Of course, Fiona did not object because he was in a serious mood. Therefore, she just silently followed him. The girl was absolutely not sure. However, for some reason it seemed to her that Sergey was worried about her, and that's why he started asking to go together. She didn't dwell on it for too long because she still didn't know how it really was, so they walked the rest of the way in silence. While they were walking, some people began to turn around because the children attracted quite a lot of attention to themselves. One of the local residents saw the girl and said that this child was the Duke's confidant, and they were very impressed. They even assumed that she could be a fraud and somehow deceive the Duke. All this was very strange. So many people could not take their eyes off them and always whispered behind their backs. Fiona has a child's body. It was very uncomfortable and uncomfortable. She did not think that their reaction would be so obvious, because as soon as she looked at the passers-by, she immediately saw condemnation in their eyes. In fact, Abel gave her power in the duchy despite the fact that he considered her very suspicious, so she quite often wondered why he entrusted it to her. She also thought that it would be best to send an adult, for example, his assistant Jerome, to this operation, so it would be much more practical. But the further she went and the more she saw people's looks, Fiona came to the conclusion that it was best for her to simply ignore all of this. She had to focus on completing the task given to her. Everything else was completely unimportant. First, the girl had to decide how to punish the mercenaries. In fact, the severity of the punishment was important, as well as the punishment of the mercenary who committed the crime. For example, Fiona could warn everyone that if they do as he does, the same fate will befall them, and take one mercenary and severely punish him in front of everyone. She believed that if everything settles down, it can help public order in the village. However, if the punishment is too mild, she will get only the opposite effect. And if there are no serious consequences, then they will think that they will be able to do the same. Accordingly, there will be no cruel punishment after which they will not be able to live normally. Therefore, all the way Fiona was thinking about what kind of punishment could suit the northern region in order for it to be just perfect. Taking into account that they were ready to chop off the thief's hand for theft, she thought that it would be a little more difficult to come up with a lasting cruel punishment than she thought. Since they were having sexual intercourse with a woman, The only way out would be to cut off their important body parts. Fiona began to think even in her ear, and Sergey heard it. He was very surprised. The guy heard this phrase and immediately looked at her in surprise and asked what she was talking about. But the girl tried to change the topic of the conversation and said that there was nothing special about it. In fact, Fiona already very much regretted that she did not tell Sergey to return first. She believed that it would have been much easier that way. The rest of the time, she continued to think about what she would do with these concubines and came up with the idea that she could drive them outside the walls of the castle where strong monsters roamed. Then she came to the conclusion that it would be best to give them a choice between these two options. So she would have to do less work. Suddenly, Sergey stopped right in front of her eyes and told Fiona that they were already there. Around then, they continued to talk among themselves. They talked about how these children were still too young and did not understand what the Duke was thinking when he sent them on such an important mission. And when Sergey heard that they began to doubt that this little girl could represent the Duke, he couldn't stand it and shouted loudly at them and asked if they could shut up already. Fiona at the same time stood in front of him, blocked the guy's way and whispered to him to be. After that, she politely turned to the man who blocked their way and asked him to go away. The guy was a little confused, but of course he let them pass. Fiona thanked him and went forward. After that, Sergey turned to her and asked if she didn't get angry at all, even in similar situations. But he smiled happily and replied that she saw absolutely no sense in this because anger will definitely not solve anything. Suddenly, some young woman ran up to her. She grabbed Fiona by the shoulders and, looking into her eyes, joyfully shouted that they had finally come. Sergey was immediately alarmed. He began to rudely ask what happened at all and why she approached Fiona so sharply. But the girl told the guy that everything was fine and he could calm down. Then she decided to listen to this stranger because it was obvious that she was very worried. The woman in a very trembling voice told Fiona that she did not know how the girl became responsible for this. However, mercenaries are not easy to deal with, so she decided to warn her about this in advance. Fiona replied that even if it was like that, people like them would rampage in the village, so she believed that the residents would be uncomfortable, so it was necessary to take some measures. But the woman continued to worry. She said that she could not stand aside when the child went against such dangerous people. That is why she decided to run out and warn her about all this. Then Fiona took her hand and asked if she could know her name. This woman was called Charlotte. The girl then happily smiled and thanked her for being so worried about her. She told Charlotte that she was really pleased. However, she advised her not to worry anymore. After that, she turned to Sergey and said that they had to go already. The guy looked at this unfamiliar girl while he was leaving, and he was still a little surprised that she really ran out. As soon as they began to approach the right place, Fiona heard some shouts. The man was talking about letting him go. Without them, they would have become food for monsters because they were weak. However, as soon as Fiona went to the right square, she saw that it was the mercenaries who were being arrested by the knights who were shouting. The men who treated the ladies cruelly and inhumanely were now shouting at the top of their lungs and talking about letting them go. They did not understand what kind of sudden punishment appeared in their direction because no one had warned them about it. Fiona understood that this meant that these were the same people after all. When she saw that one of the mercenaries almost escaped from the knight's hands, she was even a little scared because he was quite strong. She understood that it would be difficult for even several guards to cope with him, and because of this, she retreated a few steps back so that she would not be hurt in case of something. At that moment, the dark man suddenly paid attention to Fiona and Sergey, who was standing next to her. He immediately recognized the guy and wondered what he was doing in this place again. Other mercenaries also paid attention to him. They were very surprised that this guy was still alive. After all, they really left him specially to be torn apart by monsters, and did not think that he would be okay. Sergey didn't react to this in any way. He tried not to show that it was unpleasant for him. The fox clenched his fist very hard, which even made him tremble out of anger. Fiona understood that he had rather strong emotions, so she lightly touched him with her hand and thought that he needed to calm down. After that, the girl approached this same mercenary. She looked at him with an incredibly harsh look. The man was already tied with ropes at the same time so that he could not run away and hurt someone else. He disturbed the villagers with his huge body and even mocked young Sergey. It was even scary to imagine what all his victims had gone through. There were also robberies, assaults, sexual harassment of women and children, and all of this was done by this one man. He committed every possible crime except murder. Fiona could not believe that such people really existed, and she was even disgusted to look at him. Therefore, She wanted to deal with this man as soon as possible. The girl came closer and said that she came on behalf of Duke Abel Halon. Fiona also added that he should cover up the senseless resistance. After all, he still had no chance, and in this way he will only aggravate the situation. But the man only got angrier. He started to get out of his hands again and wondered why such a little girl as she even thinks that she can order him. The knight who tried to stop him only got hit in the nose, now he was bleeding. And this mercenary asked what she was going to do after such a treatment with them. He also said in a rough voice that if their group of mercenaries left, it would definitely be the end for it, because it was they who blocked the path of the monster when they attacked. So without them, this village would fall first. Other mercenaries also began to agree with the guy. They began to call civilians ungrateful idiots because they did not understand what their arrest could lead to. Fiona then took a deep breath and thought that it is certainly very beneficial for them to have the position of a victim in this situation, and they are trying to prove to everyone else that they are wrong, because it is they who protect the borders. But she was not going to act on their provocations, so she used her magical abilities and struck fire right next to one of the mercenaries who was the most violent. The guy was very scared. He managed to escape in time from the place where she hit. And as soon as he turned back after the impact ended, he saw that there was even a hole. The man was madly amazed by Sergey, who stood aside all this time and for the first time saw how the girl used her magical abilities, and was also very surprised. He fell to the ground after this and could not believe that all this really happened. After this blow, the guy became less violent. Fiona at the same time came closer to him and smiled, and said that it would be very good if he would just listen to her initially. But she said that he had already made his choice, and now she was glad that even after such harsh methods, everything finally fell into place. But suddenly she looked back and saw two more mercenaries who continued to rage. They tried to help their partner, but they were also tied up. Yes, she still understood that not everything was in its place yet, because these men were very angry, so she used a little more of her magic, and she scared these two, so that they fell to the ground and were no longer going to interfere with her. Smiling, she said that now she would leave everything as it is. They had to continue to stand obediently on their knees in front of her and listen carefully to everything she said. The mercenaries were really incredibly scared. They thought that this little girl turned out to be even worse than Abel, who had come to them before. At that moment, Fiona took out some papers and said that she thought that the court could be considered open. She stood in front of the mercenaries and began to read out their accusations. The girl said it was a violation of the pub's laws. 3 days ago, 5 people were attacked and many valuables were stolen. Sergey tried to listen to her attentively, but he could not because he was very surprised by what exactly Fiona had demonstrated. Until that moment, he doubted that she was really a magician. Now he knew that when she went to the second wall, she was really ready to stand up for herself. Moreover, compared to other magicians, she was on a completely different level. Despite the fact that Sergey had seen those who could create a ball of fire on his palms, it was the first time he had seen such a mage as Fiona, who used paper so effectively. He thinks he understands why the Duke of Hylon kept her around now. He certainly wouldn't want to give up such a wonderful advantage for himself. Also, he knew very well about the purpose of the man. A young, confident girl standing in front of guys who were many times older than her and looked like groups and also wild. To prevent this from happening, Sergey knew that without a doubt, people will remember everything well. So it will also have a positive effect on Abel's reputation. The fact that Fiona is an unusual girl will make a deep impression on all these people, and word about it will spread throughout the land. And not only this attitude towards Sagodin in the Hylon Castle was too good to consider her a simple, valuable soldier. He knew that the Duke was not one of those who do it just like that. So Sergey was very interested in what exactly Duke Abel wanted from Fiona. After all, he definitely had his own benefit from this situation. He did not think that he would ever be able to find out the answer to this question. He was one of the orphan boys in a group of mercenaries, so no one would trust him with such important information. Sergey understood that he could do nothing more for Fiona and her help. And in general, the boy began to doubt whether he would be able to see her after this mission. He told her that it would be best for them to be friends. However, he believed that she would forget about him as soon as they returned to the castle, because the guy really chose the role of an insignificant person. After Fiona read all the accusations of these mercenaries, she said that she was ready to give them 2 options, and they could choose the best one for themselves. The first option was for them to go outside the walls of the castle naked. As soon as the mercenaries heard this, they immediately began to get angry. They could not believe that she really said such a thing. But the girl did not pay attention to their outraged cries. She said that the second option was to cut off the lower part of the body. When Sergey heard this, he was incredibly amazed, as well as everyone else present there. Fiona could not believe that none of them expected such a punishment, because by their reactions, she even began to think about whether she accidentally overdid it. She clapped her hands in order to attract the attention of the people who began to whisper, and said that she definitely planned to show them some mercy. Therefore, either they go outside or castration, the choice still remains with them. So she will take into account any wishes of each hirer. Then the most violent of the men began to shout loudly and said that she should not make them laugh because he did not understand since when they have to bear such punishments. He also said, in any case, we should not have contacted the wild, non-centralized northerners. Without the protection of the mercenaries, they would have ended up in the stomach of the monster. Fiona heard this and was indignant. She immediately said that Heller Sex 2 Hylon was sufficient to compensate the mercenaries for the losses that were associated with the danger. In fact, despite the fact that Abel turned out to be cold, he was still a righteous man who was going to reward them for the danger they were exposed to while fighting off monsters. In addition, there was also a reward that could be obtained from the corpses of monsters, depending on the item. Mercenaries could receive a substantial sum when they sold it. In the end, today I understood that everyone gathered in this place in pursuit of their own profit. Halloween needed more people to protect the territory, and the mercenaries only needed money. She began to go around them from different sides and said that if they still don't choose anything, then she will decide for them, and then they will just have to do what she says. The mercenaries began to shout at her and told her to immediately untie them, but Fiona thought that it would be best to end it all for the sake of the people who had gathered on this cold day. And I had to wait a long time for punishment. Fiona had been shivering from the cold for a long time, but everyone else was silent for some reason. She didn't understand. Could it be that these people weren't as cold as they are? She assumed that it seemed possible. However, she had the feeling that the temperature had dropped by several degrees during this time, and because of this, she began to feel much more uncomfortable. Sergey already wanted to approach Fiona. However, suddenly he saw that behind them appeared many knights who were accompanying a very important person. This man, of course, turned out to be Duke Abel, a man. He approached the girl from behind and asked what decision they made. Fiona was a little surprised when she saw the Duke. She thought that he would still entrust her to deal with all this on her own. However, she calmed down a little when she found out that she was not alone. Now she understood why she felt so cold. She felt as if frosty air was blowing when the man arrived. Fiona, who continued to feel discomfort, turned to the Duke and asked what exactly brought him to this place. The man looked at her in surprise and wondered if he really needed a reason to inspect his territory in her opinion. She didn't react to it in any way. But at that moment, Abel took her in his arms again and asked what options she offered them in the end. The girl did not answer this question. She only said that she would like to ask in order to be completely confident, and asked when the man started listening to her. Abel thought about it, and after that, he said that he actually heard the phrase about the wild, uncivilized northerners. Then Fiona realized that these mercenaries would definitely not get along. If they were lucky, they would remain disabled. However, this was unlikely. Then the girl said that she gave them two options, either to go outside the castle walls naked or to cut off a part of the body with the ability to reproduce. After listening to her carefully, he said with a smile that he actually liked both of them. However, he did not understand why she decided to give them any choice at all. Fiona was a little surprised and heard this question. She then said that it would be too cruel to do both in her opinion. So she decided to show them some mercy. The girl thought that it would be more correct. Abel heard this and smiled again. He then said in a stern voice that mercy was absolutely useless in this situation. He also added that he had always told her that the nothingness that dared to raise a hand against his people in Highland was not needed by him. And at that moment he approached one of the mercenaries and kicked him incredibly hard, right between his legs. The man immediately screamed loudly in pain. At that moment the girl got goosebumps on her skin, despite the fact that he was holding her in his hands. The thirst for blood was incredibly strong and she felt it right away. Abel said that since they dared to call the land he ruled wild, he must live up to it. At that moment, he swung his leg again to strike the rest, and after that he turned to the knights and told them to impose both punishments, cut off the part of the body guilty of the offense, and drive them outside the castle walls. He told the knights to go about their duties, and he turned around, continuing to hold Fiona in his arms, and began to leave. As soon as they found themselves in the field in a calm atmosphere, he turned to the girl and said that next time, she should definitely not worry about such trifles, because it only delayed their process. All she thought was that this was a decision that endangered people's lives, so she did not understand how she could not worry about all this. The girl only said that everything was clear to her. But she herself came to the conclusion that Abel was a really evil person and it would be better not to get involved with him just once. Fiona did not understand why Abel, who has such a bad character, decided to go all this way for her. It was really very strange. When she was left alone with Jerome to make a snowman with Sergey, she decided to ask him this question after all because he worried her so much. The Duke's assistant happily smiled and explained that of course it was because he was worried about Lady Fiona, and it was for this reason that he traveled all this long way. Fiona heard about this and was very surprised. She immediately wondered if he really thought so. But at that moment, Sergey turned to them and said that if the guy had said that the end of the world would come tomorrow, he would have believed this information more than the fact that the Duke was worried about someone. Jerome heard this and did not object. He said that his lordship really had a difficult character. Fiona agreed with him and said that in fact he is more of a bad man than a good man. He explained that he was just terrible. The way he expressed his emotions was actually even worse, and that was what he disliked most about the host. However, the man also said that, despite the fact that it was very difficult to understand him, this time he really came because he was worried about the girl and she just had to accept it. Jerome said that, in fact, he probably did not think that the girl would be able to complete this task, and for this reason he decided to play it safe. For Fiona, it was really a big surprise to learn the fact that he really came not only to watch, but Jerome explained that his mercy did not abandon those who first of all needed to be watched. Jerome sat opposite her and said that in any case it is normal for her to be more confident in herself. Although he is not quite sure what exactly Abel was thinking, he believed that the girl would soon learn everything anyway, so she did not need to worry. After that, he left the children alone and said that he would go and buy a warm drink to warm up, and they had to continue. Finally, he would finish the snowman. Fiona was still a little surprised. However, she did not object and waved goodbye to him, thinking that he looked very excited, so she did not understand what was wrong. But she did not dwell on it for a long time. Fiona thought that instead of these strange thoughts, she would just play well with Sergey and continue to establish communication with him. Therefore, she turned to the guy and asked if he could help her connect the body and head. Of course, Sergey did not object and came closer to her. When he put the smaller layer on top of the larger one, he said that everything was ready. Fiona, smiling happily, immediately thanked him for it and said that everything turned out just fine for them. After that, she started smoothing the uneven areas of the snow on their laps. She was very focused, so she didn't even notice how Sergey was staring at her. For some time, the guy just watched how she was passionately engaged in this business, and after that he still decided to talk to her. Turning to Fiona, he asked what she was going to do further. The girl was a little surprised by this question, but she said that she was going to continue living like this for some time. But the boy didn't want to ask about it at all. He was very embarrassed because of it. Normally, he couldn't say what he wanted to say. In the end, he asked if she was going to come. Fiona still didn't understand what he was talking about, so she smiled and asked where exactly she was supposed to come. The guy was already starting to get a little angry that he couldn't express himself properly. Therefore, in the end, moving closer to her, he shouted loudly asking if she would come to see him. When Fiona heard this, she was so shocked that she couldn't even look away from him. She couldn't believe that now Sergey really asked if she would come to meet him after everything. The girl already wanted to tell him something. However, Sergey was so exposed to his emotions that he turned around and said that it didn't matter. He wasn't going to complicate things. Therefore, it would be better for her to just forget about it. He also said that he was only an object of concern for her, and therefore he does not want her to give him extra hopes. Sergey also said that he knows very well that she thinks that he is talking nonsense. But at that moment, Fiona suddenly took his hand and said that this is not the case at all, and she will definitely come to him with pleasure. She also said that she would come every day so that he could not worry about it. Sergey heard about this and immediately began to protest and said that she did not need to come so often. But Fiona did not listen to him. She said that she was the first to say that they should become friends, so she was not going to hear any answers. Therefore, she was going to come to him no matter what. When Sergey heard this, he was very surprised. He didn't even answer her. So in order to confirm her words, Fiona wondered if he understood everything she was saying to him. The boy just stood for a while. She continued to hold his hand, and because of this, they had a rather awkward pause, which made everyone feel uncomfortable. Fiona didn't understand why he didn't answer anything. This worried her a lot. She even thought that she had said something wrong, and he thought it was strange. Hey, it was too embarrassing, so she decided to distract herself somehow and count the sheep in her head. The girl closed her eyes and started doing it. Suddenly, Sergey finally spoke. He told Fiona that he really hoped that she would really visit him from now on. The girl again confirmed this information and said that, of course, she would be engaged in it. She thought that she just had to do it because he definitely won't be able to come to Halon Castle just like that. Therefore, at least she had to come to him in order for them to continue their relationship. Sergey suddenly came even closer to her and said that from this moment he will work hard to come to her one day. He also added that since they were friends, it would be unfair if she always came to him. He believed that it would be very tiring for her, so he would do everything possible so that he would come to her one day. In fact, the castle of Halon in which she lived was not a place where anyone could enter, and when Sergey said that he would come there, he meant that he would occupy a high position on the territory of Halon. And all this was just in order to meet with Fiona. Of course, the girl heard all this and was very surprised, so for a while she did not even know what to say to him. Sergey at the same time began to doubt himself even more. He said that she probably did not believe in all this, since he was only an orphan who really had nothing. But Fiona was not going to listen to all this. She said that of course she believed in him, and Sergey was definitely the kind of person with whom everything would work out. And not only that, in time he would achieve a lot and she believed in it. In fact, she knew very well that when he grows up, a bright future awaits him. A happy life in plenty of glory, strength, and a loving partner who will heal your wounded heart. She also promised that she would definitely help him achieve all of this, because in fact she felt a strong guilt towards the boy for the fate she had inflicted on him. In fact, she promised to help him in everything. Even when she saw his scars on that winter day, everything changed between them. After some time, Jerome returned to him and brought them hot drinks. And from that moment, Fiona really became Sergey's friend. Many days have passed since that moment, and thus 5 years have passed completely imperceptibly for Fiona. The girl had already grown quite a lot over all these years. She still continued to work near the walls, and while burning the corpses of monsters, she thought that she was really crazy. Fiona didn't understand how she could put Halon in such a cold place, and didn't know if it made sense for winter to be endless. It was incredibly cold all the time, and even many layers of warm clothes did not save her. Because of this, the girl was very often upset. By that time, she was able to grow tall, she had a beautiful figure and long silver hair. Despite the fact that many years have passed since she settled on that continent, she still continued to be helpless in front of the cold, and this certainly depressed her. Fiona. By that time, she was already an adult, and when she was on one of the missions and burned several corpses, the girl tried to move in order to warm her body a little. This was noticed by one of the knights who was nearby. He immediately told her to keep vigilance because no one knows when the next monster might attack. He also wondered what she would do if suddenly new monsters appeared. Fiona at the same time looked at him in surprise, not understanding why he was saying all this at all. But when I looked at him more closely, I realized that this soldier was on the battlefield for the first time. His name was Alan. That's why he behaved like that. She immediately turned to him and told the boy not to worry because she was quite focused. And at that moment, she directed fire at the monster that was already attacking the knight nearby. As soon as Alan saw it, he was very surprised. Fiona at the same time replied that there would be big problems if she didn't notice him, but he certainly couldn't worry about her. So it was best for him to just carefully look around and notice new targets. She also said that if he was distracted for even 1 second, he would become a monster. He didn't have such strength as her. Therefore, he really needed to be very careful. Alan was incredibly frightened by what had happened, so he didn't even answer her. And Fiona, smiling at the same time, thought that he was much more frightened than she thought. So she decided that she needed to calm him down at least a little, because he wouldn't be able to fight anymore. Therefore, coming closer to him, she put her hand on his shoulder and told him not to fight. She came to this place with them in order to prevent something from happening to him like the others. Also, smiling, she asked him to cheer up and start his work. As soon as the boy heard all these inspiring words and looked at this beautiful young girl, his heart immediately began to beat faster. He even cried and wanted to get closer to Lady Fiona, but at that moment he suddenly heard a roar behind him and saw that the head of the monster that fell to the ground made these sounds. The knight was incredibly frightened because of this. He was already ready to run away somewhere further, and Fiona sighed heavily and answered that there was no point in calming him down. She said that this soldier was still young, and after that she added to the man who had just cut off the moving head of the monster that they needed to take care of him more. In fact, the person who cut off the head was a tall, dark-haired man who was a professional in his field. Wiping the monster's blood from his face, Sergey told the girl not to just stand still, but better move aside. Fiona couldn't tear her eyes away from him. She wanted to say something to him, but she couldn't, because the beautiful feeling that Sergey had evoked before still lived in her. Now, when he was standing against this gloomy landscape, she felt that it was frightening in how well it all came together. However, she could not help but enjoy this beautiful view. When Sergey grew up to be a truly incredibly handsome guy but continued to be just as stubborn, she assumed that perhaps he had a transitional age. However, she believed that at the age of 19 he was already quite an adult young man. She said that Sergey should have apologized for scaring that poor soldier who was on his first mission so much, because at such a pace, everyone will surely run away from them. The guy sighed heavily and said that Abel said that all newbies were trained and that he would have problems if he got scared because of such a trifle. After that, he ran his sword along the ground with an incredibly loud crunch and said that this was only the beginning, and there were still many unpleasant scenes ahead of him. But Fiona stopped him because even some of their old knights were very frightened when they saw this sight and began to look away from him. In fact, the girl knew that Abel said that he had no problems in communicating with other people. However, she did not understand why he behaved in such a way in such a case. For her, it was all very strange. Then she pushed the guy aside and turned to everyone present and in a gentle voice told them not to worry. The knights immediately started looking at her, and Fiona continued to smile and answered that she was actually the same as them, so that they will definitely become much better very soon and they will not need to be afraid. Then one of the newcomers suddenly raised his hand. He was the bravest and said that he had one question. Fiona immediately allowed him to ask it. The guy said, "I heard that one of the soldiers will be chosen to protect Lady Fiona. Even though I'm just a rookie, if I work hard, they'll pick me." When the girl heard it, she beamed with joy. It was an unexpected but very important question. The soldiers with whom she worked were very experienced, so it is not surprising that the newcomers admired it. So, smiling, she said that of course, if they are the best of the best, they will have every chance. Alan was beaming with joy. He really wanted to work with a girl, but suddenly Sergey for some reason started looking at everyone present. Fiona immediately drew attention to this. She didn't understand why he was looking at them like that. She even assumed that the soldiers might get scared again and she would have to calm them all down again. However, in fact, it was worth waiting for each time Sergey became more and more like Abel. Since 5 years had already passed since Fiona arrived in Highland, it meant that the original story would finally begin very soon. In a couple of months, they will be an hour older since Sergey fulfilled the promise he made to her as a child. As the story progresses, he learned fencing from Abel. In addition, he was in a position that he could freely enter and leave Highland now. People around him were not only afraid of Sergey's strength, but no one dared to even look down on him, because he really was a master. She tried her best to achieve her main goal, namely to live a peaceful life. Also, she was able to earn a lot from the sale of monster parts, and therefore she was very happy that her plan worked little by little. In fact, she didn't need to worry about money at all. Now I only had to wait for Sergey to meet Yuri, and make sure that they would go on the happy path of a couple in love. The girl herself will be able to enjoy her quiet single life at the same time. So she was looking forward to this moment with great impatience. While in this whole plan, there was one more person who interfered with its execution, and Abel was just that person. When Fiona returned after her mission, she went straight to him, and the man asked if she had already thought about his proposal. The girl replied that she was in the process of thinking. In fact, this proposal was a serious obstacle to her plan. The man said at the same time that he could not believe that she had forgotten about his request that she call him Papa. The proposal that Abelis made to her quite recently was that she become his adopted daughter. But the girl eventually thought about all this and said that she would not have wanted it very much. The man finally became very sad because of this, and he asked her to at least carefully weigh all the pros and cons of this proposal, and in the end, only then did she give him an answer. Then Fiona explained that ever since she arrived in Halon, she already had an initial plan. She explained to the man that she would wait until Sergey got married and then live his life in a quiet place. As soon as the man heard about this poor boy Sergey, he immediately frowned. The man was surprised and asked if she really didn't care about the title of power and wealth as well as the glory that Hylon had, even if they would eventually become hers after she agreed to his proposal. The girl replied that she really didn't care about it, but Abel continued to persuade her and said that if he became her father, she would have everything she wanted. Laughing nervously, Fiona replied that she felt bad, even from the fact that she simply imagined that he would be her father now, so she definitely did not want to agree to this proposal. The man became angry with her. He began to call her a ruthless little girl, and he was also interested in whether it is because she has already grown up that she wants to get up Ochin Nezavisimi. She didn't answer anything, Then Abel sighed heavily and said that if she didn't like it, he could forget about it. Besides, she's been through a lot in recent years, so he was still personally grateful to her. When Fiona heard about it, she immediately became a little wary. She wondered why he suddenly decided to talk about it. Did he really become terminally ill? But Abel said that he was very embarrassed to talk about it, so he wanted her to just listen to him in silence. The man said, "Since childhood, you have decided to fight monsters. Therefore, I think that the pride of the earth is the only thing that can leave you on this boring job." The situation that was at that time in Hylon was stable. There were fewer monsters, and he had a couple of strong knights like Sergey and other soldiers. So he told Fiona that if she really wanted to leave, he wasn't going to keep her. Seeing her surprised expression on her face, he explained that she was already an adult and could do whatever she wanted. Thanks to her magical skills, she can enjoy a luxurious life even in the capital and not think about any troubles at all. Abel said that if he worried about her because she was a bastard, he was ready to protect her on behalf of Hylon, so she wouldn't have to worry about that either. He explained that with the help of this protection, no one in the capital would dare to treat her badly, so she could definitely be safe. It was quite difficult for Fiona to imagine all this. Then she said that it was very kind of him to make her such a favorable offer. The man turned his gaze away from her and said that in fact there was nothing special about it. He was just giving her what she really deserved. This Fiona was a little surprised. She asked in an alarmed voice if he had not already repaid her for this. The man immediately started raising his voice at her and asked who she thought he was. He explained that this was all payment for her work. This is completely different. Fiona actually did not know that such a strict duke could turn out to be an incredibly kind and just person, and she in her heart asked him for forgiveness for considering him an insensitive tyrant. Then Abel put the envelope on the table and asked her to take it. He explained that it was her letter from her home. Fiona heard that it was indeed a letter from her original home. She was very surprised that it was from the family of Count Green. People forcibly sent a child like her to the battlefield. They had not sent her a single letter in the last 5 years, so she was very surprised when she received it now. In her hands is this letter. She said that she had not heard news from them for a long time, so she was interested in Abel's opinion. Why did they decide to send her some kind of letter? Well, put the man in his seat and say that he really doesn't know why they did that. After that, he said that if she suddenly wishes, he can destroy the house that sent her to this place. He even got a little bit of compromising information on this family. She still couldn't believe that Abel really offered her this kind of help. Then she immediately said that she wasn't that vindictive at all, and that she really didn't care about them at all. The man sighed heavily and said that it was really in her style. However, if he had received the power in her place, he would have destroyed all of them without leaving a speck of dust from these terrible people. But be that as it may, Fiona was sure that the original story would begin very soon and the main character should appear soon. If the girl continues to stay on Sergey's side, then she may lose her mind before reading the letter. She turned to Abel and thanked him for such a wonderful proposal. The man then told her to call him father if she wanted to express her gratitude. But the girl opened the front door with a smile and said that she'd better not do that. Abel. This made him angry. He sighed heavily. He said that she was a cruel girl, but after that she simply left and closed the door behind her. Fiona thought that he was particularly grumpy that day, so she decided not to annoy him anymore. When she returned to her room, she lay down on the bed, and the first thing she did was to read the letter that was handed to her. When she read it, she was a little surprised. But it was a joyful surprise because they asked to confirm her death. In that letter, it was said that her father, Count Grin, was now in critical condition, so they were dealing with an inheritance. In the letter, she was asked to send her a document that would confirm the death of Fiona, a blood relative of the Green family. The girl realized that from the very beginning they didn't expect her to stay alive. She was a hindrance to the family that sent her to die 5 years ago. They forgot about her a long time ago, and now they suddenly remembered only because they had to share the inheritance. Fiona put the letter aside and thought that this family would definitely never change her, and she didn't care about the inheritance of the Green family. She didn't have to meet her father on his deathbed. However, she did not understand why such things happen at the moment when Abel told her to live and do everything she wants. She also understood that her family would definitely be unhappy to hear that she was still alive. While her name was still in the Green family registry, if her death is not confirmed, then of course her brothers and sister will find out that she is still alive. Fiona seriously thought about the fact that she should have signed a document on the refusal of inheritance. Abel said that she could take revenge. However, she considered it really unnecessary measures. She did not want to take out her anger for what happened many years ago. There was no need to kill or pass this aristocrat. If she does not want to end up in prison, then the most peaceful and simple way for her was to sign a waiver of inheritance and become a complete stranger to them. But Fiona was a little alarmed by the fact that she had to return there in order to do it. But then she realized that she was still going to take a little walk around the capital, so she decided that it wouldn't be too much trouble for her. Suddenly, the girl heard a knock on her door, after which Sergey's voice was heard, asking if she was in the room. The girl immediately ran quickly to the door and opened it. She smiled happily. She said that he wanted to go inside, but Sergey, embarrassed, said that it was not necessary at all. They could speak at the entrance. Just a few years ago, they were so close that they could talk even sitting next to each other. That's why today was surprising his proposal. Lately, he felt awkward because they were already adults, so she had to respect his boundaries. Then, Sergey said that he had heard from Abel that she could leave this place. Fiona then sternly asked him to call him teacher. The guy immediately corrected himself, although he was angry about it, but she eventually said that this information might well be true. Sergey immediately frowned and asked where she was going to go in that case. Fiona explained that in Perm, the letter said that her father was dying, so she was going to return to the capital, since the Grin family were middle-class aristocrats, so they had a mansion in the capital. Sergey then asked in a worried voice if she still considered the man who abandoned her to be her father. In fact, Fiona herself didn't like being called that, so she didn't answer, but only smiled. Sergey, standing at the entrance, asked if she would spend time with her father until he died and then return to him. But she replied that it was not like that. She planned to stay in the capital for some time anyway. After a short silence, Sergey said that it was really a good idea to go to the capital because she had already lived in Hylon for a long time, but he still wanted to know when she would return. Fiona then realized that Sergey apparently understood her completely incorrectly, and that is why he continued to ask similar questions. So, in order for him to finally understand everything, she decided to tell him directly and said that she would not return. As soon as he heard about it, at first the guy was in a stupor, then he suddenly started shouting loudly, asking what she meant when she said such a thing. Fiona calmly explained that she would not return. Then he asked why she made such a decision. Looking Sergey straight in the eyes, the girl answered that this was all because she had no reason to stay in this place any longer. So she was just going to move on. Over the past few years, she and Sergey became close friends, and sometimes Fiona even protected him. But now that the original story will soon begin, she would no longer be able to help him. Sergey then entered her room and told the group in a voice that they needed to talk about it seriously. The girl missed him, although she was surprised by his sudden change of mood, and he wondered if it was true that she said that she would leave. Fiona said that everything is exactly like that. He was getting closer and closer to her, and still, we asked in a worried and restless voice why she made this decision so abruptly. She answered that, as the Duke said, she was already an adult and therefore could do everything she wanted, and that was exactly what she wanted. Sergey continues to get angry and asked, "That's all that you can say. You forgot. Because of what we've been through in the last 5 years, you just leave me." Fiona was surprised and wondered if he was really so upset because of this. Then she said that she would definitely write to him, so he didn't have to worry that she would forget about him. But Sergey, continuing to be angry, said that it wasn't the case at all, that was the problem. The girl did not understand him at all. Then she said, "Don't tell me that you thought that we would always be together." The moment the man immediately got very upset, he didn't answer her. However, it was clear from his reaction that this is exactly what he thought. Fiona continued to scatter arguments. She said that they were both adults, and despite the fact that they were childhood friends, it was time to part. Sergey took a deep breath, turned away, and began to walk away from her. He said that she was too heartless, and he didn't like it. But she asked him to include logic and not just his feelings. Did he really not understand why she made such a decision? But the guy only wondered if she was going to stay in the capital forever. Fiona replied that she wasn't sure yet. First, she would like to go somewhere warm to rest. The man was incredibly upset. Then she asked him not to make such a sad face, as if she was simply betraying him in this way, because it was not so at all. For some time, they just stood and were silent. The girl thought that they were no longer children, and it was difficult for her to accept the fact that he really believed that he could be with her forever. But she understood why Sergey was like that when he heard about her departure to the capital, because people lived there who wanted his death. This is his homeland and the place from where he was forced to flee. Therefore, it hurt him to see that she was going there and he could not. Fiona then put her hands on his cheeks, moved his gaze towards her, and asked him not to be so sad. The girl knew that in any case, according to the plot, he would come to the capital sooner or later, so he really could not be so upset because of it. In a gentle voice, the girl said that she will always be on his side. Wherever he is, if he needs help, he will definitely help. He can tell her about it. She will come to him at any time. Then, in a very sad and quiet voice, the man asked what would happen if he told her to stay in this place and not leave him. Today, it was incredibly difficult to solve this whole situation. If he continues to cling to Halon, the original story will not be able to continue. Therefore, she had to act radically and cruelly for his own good. Fiona smiled and said that he could ask for anything but this man, then began to move away from her and said that she was so contradictory. Sergey also asked where she wanted to go in general. Didn't she know that it is very important to have a friend who will help you in times of need? And there she will be completely alone. The girl didn't answer anything. Then he suddenly took her hands again and asked what exactly she was thinking about him. Fiona was surprised by such a sharp question, so she was even a little confused at first. She began to move away from him a little further and said that he was an important person in this world for her. Then Sergey said that he would like to know if he left for another place, what she would do in such a case, how she would react. Fiona then seriously thought about this question because she had never thought about something like this before. But she answered him quite quickly, happily smiling, saying that of course she would wish him luck and say goodbye to him, and also that she would definitely come to him if he needed help. Sergey was very angry when he heard this. He turned around and started to leave and said that he really was stupid when he asked her about it. It only gave him even more pain. At that moment, Fiona suddenly felt a strong cold. She said that she was a little cold, so she was going to go and look for a cape so that she wouldn't get sick again. Then she once spoke to the closet and said that the maids washed the blanket and left them here. But for some time, she could not find them. Sergey looked at her carefully. He understood that very soon she would leave and he would not see her again. Because of this, he felt very sad again. Therefore, the guy went around her from the other side and suddenly hugged her from the back. He held her quite tightly. The guy could barely hold back his tears. It was very strange for the girl. Sergey never hugged her from the back. She was as if in a trap, and because of this, she felt uncomfortable. Finally, the guy spoke and said that if she still leaves this place, it is best for her to stay in the capital. He said, "If you think about it, there is nothing special about it in any case. Everything has always been like that. Wherever you are, I will definitely come for you." Fiona was very surprised. However, she shouldn't have been so surprised because in the end, Sergey was always such a person. He had already promised something similar in his childhood, and in the end, all this time he continued to keep this promise. After a short while, the guy hugged her and finally let her go and told her to wait for him in the capital. After that, he left and closed the door behind him. Fiona was very surprised that evening. She couldn't sleep for a long time because she was thinking about those words of Sergey and what exactly he meant. However, 2 months have passed since then, and Fiona has finally packed all her things in order to leave. She didn't have too many bags because Fiona wasn't one of those people who was nervous about things. She only used everything she needed. Abel went out to accompany her, and he noticed that a lot of people had come to say goodbye to Fiona. However, Sergey was not there for some reason. The girl replied that this was most likely due to the fact that he was really upset about her departure, so he could not step over himself and say goodbye in front of everyone. Abel then wondered if he hadn't said anything else after that evening, and she said that he would definitely come for her, so that it didn't mean anything. In fact, she was a little worried about it. After all, if the main character does something that he has never done before, then this is a fatal prediction. Abel smiled as if he were proud of Sergey and said that this was really all about him. After that, he handed a small letter to the girl. He said that it was a letter of recommendation. The Duke told her to use him if she decided to stay in a mansion in Hylon in the capital. Fiona opened him and saw that he even gave her a lot of money in the end, so she was very happy. They talked for a while, but the moment had come when it was time to say goodbye. "So I got into the carriage." Fiona turned to the Duke and thanked him for everything he had done. The man smiled and simply said, "Okay," but Fiona understood that even at such a moment, Abel was still very happy and proud of her. When the carriage started to leave, Fiona also said goodbye to all the maids who saw her off with tears in their eyes, and they said that they would miss her incredibly. When she left the estate, Fiona decided that she needed to rest a little. Since everything turned out that way, she just had to accept the situation and go with the flow. At this very moment, in the mansion of the Green family, the brothers gathered at the dining table to discuss the situation that was happening to them. Cain turned to Jane and said that, as he already knew, their father was very sick and they were told to be ready at the hospital. Since the chance that their father would come to his senses was incredibly small, however, they also had one problem. And this problem consisted in the fact that this happened before the father wrote his will. Accordingly, he will no longer be able to do this. Therefore, he happily smiled and said that they, as the elder of the Tyres and the heir of the family, will solve the inheritance problem on their own. Jane suddenly smiled and said that his brother was certainly very convincing. However, he wondered where the law existed that only the eldest son inherited the family title. He said that the Green family was a magician family, so it is clear that the strongest of them should have received this title. As soon as his brother heard about this, of course, he immediately began to be indignant. He wondered if Jane really wanted to say that he was better than him in magic. But the brother smiled and said that it was quite obvious, and also asked him to tell what kind of magic he could use, perhaps to conjure up a bonfire unless he could. This made Cain so angry that he was even ready to rush and fight with his brother. He began to shout, asking how he dared to say such a thing to his face. I do not know about his difficulties. After this, he even began to drive his brother out of the house. But Jane wondered why he thought so. Because his brother was the only one who caused damage to the reputation of their family of magicians. So he was the one who had to leave this place. At that moment, Countess Green, who heard their arguments while passing by, could not pass by. So she decided to come in and resolve their differences. He opened the door to the room and she wondered if they had started arguing about the same thing again. Also, the woman said that if rumors spread and people start gossiping, it will be a shame for their whole family, so it would be better for them to watch their language. Cain continued to shout and told his mother that she probably meant the terrible relationship that Jane had with his brother. His brother immediately said that it was better than a useless older son who would destroy the family. Cain already started to say something to him in response, but the Countess shouted loudly and told them to stop already. The woman slammed her hand on the table and said that she would not allow them to argue about such nonsense, even so loudly. Approaching them closer, she smiled and said that she would definitely take care of the inheritance. So it was best for them to stop fighting until it all got out of control. But suddenly, Jane said that despite the fact that she was their mother, she still had no such right. The woman who heard this was amazed. She did not expect such impudence from her own son. The guy explained that everyone in this house knew about her love affairs, so she was definitely not the person who should solve such problems. He also said that they had heard about how she had given this group a lot of money, and he was already afraid that the state of their family would fall into his hands. The woman began to be very indignant. She wondered how he dared to say such things to the mother who raised him. Cain smiled and told her not to be angry with them, no matter who she was having an affair with, so they definitely weren't going to condemn her. His brother agreed and said that if this rumor spread among the nobles, his mother's honor would suffer incredibly, and of course it would affect the whole family very much. The woman already wanted to answer him something, when suddenly the butler knocked on their room. He turned to the ladies and the young owners, asking if he could come in. The Countess, who was still incredibly angry, shouted loudly and asked what he wanted, and the butler said that a guest had arrived, so they needed the women's orders. When she heard about the guests, she was immediately very surprised. After all, they weren't waiting for anyone. The woman immediately opened the door and asked the butler who he was. The man lowered his head and said that this was a person who went to Hylon 5 years ago. Her name was Lady Fiona Green. She returned to them. As soon as the Countess and her sons heard this, they were very surprised. Cain slammed his hand on the table and said that it was simply impossible. They all thought that she was dead a long time ago. He wondered how she could still be alive, and Jane assumed that it was most likely some imposter. He said that for a 13-year-old child, it was impossible to squeeze out on the northern battlefield, so probably someone was just trying to trick them. Moreover, he knew that she did not know even the simplest magic, so she would definitely be there. She would not be able to survive in any way. They thought they knew everything about Fiona Green. They knew that the Count brought her into the house. However, she was a useless, illegitimate child who was thrown into the attic. She was a child who was sent to her death by her own family as an attempt to fulfill the king's order. However, no one felt guilty about this. They were only upset when they found out that now it was Fiona who came to them, claiming that she was alive. The Countess immediately told the butler to drive her away because, even without looking at her, she was absolutely sure that this was an imposter. But Fiona, who at that moment appeared behind the butler, said in a low voice that it was a little rude. The man immediately tried to stop her. He said that Leda could not enter without an invitation, but Fiona did not listen to him. She pushed the man aside and finally entered the room. Her whole family now saw the girl, and Fiona said that it was definitely really difficult to finish a long journey and return home. That's it. Only the brothers saw their sister. They were very surprised. Jane immediately said that it was probably a mass hallucination. They definitely could not believe in the fact that she was alive. But Fiona smiled sweetly and said, "I received the death certificate you sent." She assumed that they hated personal meetings with her, preferring to write. However, she liked face-to-face conversation the most, and that's why she came straight to them. The Countess already wanted to ask something, but the girl didn't let her do it. She clapped her hands. She said that it had been a long time since they last saw each other, and I asked if they would greet her with great enthusiasm. She also said that she was really happy that nothing had changed in their family, because she would have started to worry if she had seen the smiles on their faces. Sitting in incredibly high tension, they didn't know what Fiona needed, and that's why they were very worried. That day, they did not solve all the cases because it was already too late. Her family gave her a decent room, so Fiona was even able to get some sleep. The first thing she did when she woke up in the morning was a little scared because it wasn't the walls of Highland but the house of Count Grin. Therefore, it took her some time to remember where she was and why. Fiona believed that if they had sent her to the attic as before, she would definitely have made a fuss, but she would have gotten the right room for herself. Also, it was very pleasant for her to remember the whole evening their surprised expressions on their faces. They made her very happy, so Fiona already knew that this trip was not in vain. These people were arguing about the inheritance as soon as she entered, and it was immediately clear, but Fiona really hated that she was dragged into all this, because she already wanted to start living her quiet, peaceful life. She thought that the best thing would be to sign the papers about the refusal of the inheritance and leave tomorrow in order not to stay even a minute in this terrible place. Suddenly, someone knocked on her room. It was a maid. She said that she had brought Lady Fiona water for washing. Of course, the girl was very surprised to hear this. However, she allowed her to enter. Then the maid put a bowl of water in front of her, and Fiona thanked her for it. But she saw that a little spilled from this bowl and thought that the maid should be more careful. The water splashed only because it was roughly put down. She immediately remembered the fact that the maid Hylon would never have made such a mistake. And because of this, she felt a little sad. She even missed home a little, because that place was now her home. But Fiona, bending over to wash herself, took a closer look and noticed that the pot was incredibly dirty, and the water smelled bad. And after looking even more carefully, the girl realized that it was dirty water, and water that was used to wash rags. She could not believe that she was really given to wash herself with dirty water, which was used to wash rags. She did not know how it was possible to be such idiots and vile people. Because Fiona was a family member who lived on the battlefield for 5 years, and she couldn't believe that they were really treating her like this now. She was incredibly angry, but suddenly she heard some strange sounds coming from the maid. She immediately looked up to see what it was, and when she looked up, she saw that this maid was impudent and started laughing right in Fiona's face. After looking at her more closely, she thought that she had already seen this face somewhere, and then suddenly she realized that she had seen her before. Namely, 5 years ago she was a maid of honor, and a countess who always treated Fiona badly because she was an illegitimate daughter. Now, Fiona realized the fact that she didn't get this room by accident. They had conspired from the very beginning to treat her badly even now. And this means that this family has always considered Fiona a worthless bastard, and now even the fact of what she has achieved has not changed anything in their thinking. In this case, the people of this family were still mistaken in thinking that she would continue to endure this, and that she remained the same Fiona who was incapable of anything to stand up for herself. They still think that Fiona was the child of a 10-year-old illegitimate girl who, according to them, had only half of her blood ties, money, home, and property. Fiona believed that if they continued to treat her like this, then her thirst for revenge would flare up with new force. If you imagine that Fiona suffered like this all her life, then the girl understood that she could not just leave it like that. So she turned to the maid and asked what her name was. Her name was May, and Fiona said that she had seen this face before. At that moment, she even suddenly started to smile. The girl was definitely up to something.